Hello and welcome everyone to the symposium It's Been Too Hot, the reality of coffee farming in the era of climate change by the Initiative for Coffee and Climate. My name is 𝗕𝗲𝗀𝗶𝘀𝗺. I'm going to guide you through the event today and tomorrow. And yeah, I'm actually particularly excited because we have a fantastic 600 plus registrations. And I think today in the morning was like 650 registrations, which I find really amazing. And also that so many people are really interested in this important topic, climate change and its effects on coffee production. And yeah, I'm pretty sure that, and I hope that you're not going to be disappointed because we have really invited 11 amazing speakers with a whole variety of topics. We have different perspectives, we have scientists and practitioners. And yeah, so today we are going to start right now with a short welcome note by our program manager of Coffee and Climate. Then we will continue with a 30 minutes movie that gives you a short introduction into the topic. And then we will have 3 blocks today and tomorrow. We start with the block that gives you insight into the challenges of climate change in the coffee growing regions. That will also give a bit, point out different perspectives inside the coffee value chain, which I think is very interesting, and also shed light on the very important topic of food security that is very much connected to climate change in tropical regions. Then today also we have another block that gives a bit insight into different solution approaches. We will talk about the land use management system of agroforestry, and also take us to 2 other projects as little success stories, which is very nice. And then tomorrow we have a block of 4 talks about the topics of potential pitfalls and barriers, because we also think it's important to not only talk about successes and what is working well, but also to have a realistic perspective on what can go wrong, where are potential pitfalls in the implementation of sustainability projects. So tomorrow we are having 4 speakers who really share their personal and professional experiences while implementing projects. And I hope you will be here today, the whole day, and also tomorrow again. And I would say right now, before we start, just one technical detail. You see in the menu bar on the bottom of your screen, you see 2 speech bubbles and which say Q&A. So whenever you have a question for one of the speakers, just pop it there whenever it comes up. And after every talk, we will have a short 10 minutes Q&A session where we will try to answer your question. Okay, so I would say I just hand over now to my colleague 𝗕𝗲𝗺𝗀𝗶𝘂𝗺, the program manager of today's host Coffee and Climate, with his welcome note. Stefan, please, the floor is yours.
Thanks so much, Annika. When I sat down to think about my opening for the welcome note, as is often the case, I first wanted to point out the problem of climate change. I had already picked out maps showing the decline in coffee production areas. I collected photos showing the disastrous impact of climate change on the lives of smallholder farmers, extreme droughts, landslides, or pest and disease outbreaks. And to be honest, I started to feel very sad about all these thoughts. Next slide. But then I remembered one of my first project visits for the 𝗤𝗏-Neumann-Stiftung in 2018. I had just taken on my first climate project and traveled to Uganda. And I met Stella there. You can see her on the right side of the screen. And when we visited her farm, we could tell from far away that she radiated an abundance of infinite strength, and you could see the determination in her eyes. And she told us her story, and life struck Stella very hard with the loss of her husband, who was the family's main breadwinner. And in spite of the circumstances, Stella did not think about giving up because of her children, but also for herself. The best way to make this possible possible was for Stella to move back to her parents' home and take over some of their farmland. However, if I had shown pictures of her farm from back then, it would have been a sad view. Climate change and the lack of knowledge about how to deal with it did not promise a living income from her farm. But Stella again did not give up and joined the Coffee and Climate program in 2017. Over the years, Stella received training on how to make her production more resilient, how to intercrop coffee with other cash and food crops, and most important, managing her farm, even the small plot of land, as a business. And as a result, she doubled yield. She used to get 1 to 1.5 kilo of coffee per tree, and after 2 years, she got 2 to 3 kilos per tree. She has contributed 10 tons of coffee to a farm organization for bulking over 5 seasons. And maybe more important, she has become a role model and example to fellow farmers in her community and frequently trains them on how to strengthen their climate change resilience. After all, I couldn't think of a better introduction than telling her story. Next slide, please. Because her example shows that it's possible to react to climate change. And for that, we need to identify location-specific solutions together with the farmers and with relevant knowledge partners. But unfortunately, as coffee sector, we don't talk enough about what farmers like Stella need and how we as a sector can support them to adapt their farms towards climate change. Too often we focus in our discussions on the needs of the coffee industry, such as securing of supply chain, making coffee production more sustainable, or complying with regulations. But what needs to be done to secure the livelihoods of smallholder farmers in times of climate change? And to bring back this important perspective, we wanted to organize this symposium. Over the course of the next 2 days, we will hear about best practices and possible solutions and highlight also potential pitfalls. Starting today with how to establish coffee production systems of the future that provide income, food security, and do not cause harm to the environment. Next slide, please. And we will talk about the importance of providing farmers with access to finance, the role of women, and the next farmer generation on climate action. Next slide, please. Because as Initiative for Coffee and Climate, one of our objectives is to provide a platform function for learning, sharing of experiences, connecting relevant actors to develop together real climate action in the field. And most important, be in a dialogue with farmers to understand what they need to become more climate resilient. Next slide, please. So once again, many thanks to all speakers. I wish everyone from our audience lots of exciting insights, and I look forward to the exchange. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Stefan, for this introductory talk, and also for your personal experiences that you had with Stella. So it's was, I think, a very nice introduction. I would now like to lead over already to our first block, which is the impacts of climate change on coffee production, landscapes, and livelihoods. Here we are going to have 3 talks, and we are going to start with 𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂, and she is an assistant professor at the 𝗕𝗲𝗵 Business School in Barcelona, and her work focuses on the governance of sustainability in global value chains, with a special focus on tropical agricultural commodities such as coffee and palm oil. Hello, Janina.
Hello, very nice to be there. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, Janina is going to basically continue with a topic that we have touched already several times today, And that is the big question, resilience of what and for whom. And I find it particularly interesting because it really, I think, makes a bit also change of perspective than what we are usually talking about. Because, yeah, your talk is about adaptation, but also about transformation. And it's going to examine what resilience actually means, also from the different perspectives of the actors in the whole coffee value chain. So yeah, I would just hand over to you. I think you're sharing the presentation by yourself.
Yes, I will share it. Is it okay if we start before 3? Yes, we just start now.
Yeah,
So
I
a
think
couple of minutes. Okay.
maybe then you also have a bit more time to elaborate.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. All right, again, thank you so much for having me, and it's a pleasure to be here and discuss this. As Annika mentioned, I'm an assistant professor at 𝗕𝗲𝗶𝘁𝗀𝗶 Business School, and I'll be talking from some experiences that I've been discussing with colleagues in the 𝗥𝗲'𝗀𝗃 project, which is a research project called The Paradoxes of Climate-Smart Coffee, in which we examine climate change mitigation adaptation strategies, both in coffee growing communities, but also along coffee value chains in Tanzania and Ethiopia. And this is a collaborative project led out of Copenhagen Business School with the project partners of 𝗕𝗲𝗄 University in Ethiopia, the University of 𝗕𝗲𝗵 in Tanzania, Lafayette College in the US, and 𝗕𝗲𝗵. And we're a team of 20 or even more people that has been examining this topic over the last 2.5 years. And we've just in last summer concluded some very extensive field work, both in Tanzania, including actually in the coffee region that was in the video in 𝗬𝗂, but also 𝗕𝗲𝗵 and 𝗕𝗵, as well as in Ethiopia. And we're still crunching the data, we're still analyzing, but I'll bring some insights from the field, but also wanted to talk a little bit more about our conceptual approach, how we think about climate change and climate change resilience especially, and what kind of questions we are interested in coming from this more theoretical or conceptual perspective. So I also want to acknowledge and sort of draw attention to this reading or this article that actually helped me quite a lot in thinking about this, which is called Theoretical Positions and Approaches to Resilience Assessment in Farming Systems, a review by Vanderlee et al. So if people are interested in furthering some thoughts around the topics that I'll discuss today, please feel free to read and also let me know what you think. So from my perspective, it's always useful to start with some definitions. And if we are thinking about aiming for resilience, a coffee sector or a system that is resilient, we can think about what that means. And one quite common definition is that resilience is the capacity of a system to absorb perturbations or disturbances and reorganize while undergoing change, so as to still retain essentially the same function, structure, identity, and feedbacks. And this tells us a lot, but it also opens up new questions, including what system are we talking about? At what level, at what scale are we aiming for resilience? Which perturbations and disturbances are we considering and are we responding to? If we want this system to absorb and reorganize, what is the outcome that we're aiming for in these practices, and how should we go about this? And finally, if it should be retaining the same function, what function are we thinking about, and who is this function serving? And so let me illustrate these questions by really thinking about this question in the coffee sector. Usually, maybe without even thinking too much about it, we tend to think about coffee sector resilience as a sector-wide issue. But we could obviously also think about it at a slightly smaller scale, at an origin level scale, where we think about origin, national level resilience of a sector and its component parts. Or we could go even more at the micro level, at an individual or community level, and think about livelihood resilience, the farming system or the production system that these people are in on a community level. Why does this matter? Because the level of resilience that we're thinking about will then also inform what function this resilience should serve and for whom. And as Stefan actually already mentioned a bit, oftentimes when we think about coffee sector resilience, we then think about, okay, the function of the coffee sector is to produce coffee, right? And to meet demand in the future as well, which means that we want to make sure that we're having production, high quality production, that we're able to smooth boom and bust cycles, and ideally also have production in different places, especially in order to prevent climate shocks from really affecting supply. At a national or origin level, the aims or functions of the coffee sector might be quite different, right? In this case, it's actually a tool or a means to the end of contributing to GDP and foreign exchange earnings, to serve as a rural development driver, to allow for rural farmers to attain good livelihoods. And again, at the individual or community level, here the goal of resilience, of livelihood resilience, would be the ability to have a sustainable livelihood in the long run, to achieve a living income derived from a variety of on and off farm activities within a healthy ecosystem. And so depending on what type of system now we're thinking about, we could think about to what extent the coffee production is required and necessary, or how it focuses on these types of functions, right? The next question to ask is, which perturbations and disturbances are we interested in, are we considering when we are implementing our adaptation strategies? And of course, the topic of today is climate change, as shown in the video and described by Stefan. It's a very important topic. But of course, we all know that on the ground, at a national or even local level, there are also a number of other disturbances and perturbations, shocks that producers are faced with. This can range from regulatory changes, both in the producing as well as the consuming country, to price shocks. We have just exited a quite long coffee price crisis. I remember 2019 when this was the big issue at play. Nowadays, the prices have recovered and nobody seems to be talking about the coffee price crisis anymore, but it might, that the next one will likely happen at some point in time. And of course, in recent years, and especially after COVID, there are also inflationary shocks that can affect consumer prices, also for producers that are reliant on buying certain types of good for their own consumption. And so all of those types of perturbation and shocks, of course, affect them at the same time and need to be considered in a resilient livelihood strategy. We also can think about what type of outcome we're aiming for when we're aiming for resilience. And here it's quite interesting to go back to the literature, because many times, because we're thinking about a system that is fulfilling the same function, the implicit aim is that it is a system that is stable, that bounces back to its original state, right? A system that can modify itself in small ways, but in the main ways, it remains the same. But we also find alternative approaches in how people think about resilience. One is through a vulnerability perspective, where the ultimate aim is to reduce vulnerability of affected actors in that particular system. And how the system looks eventually is secondary to the goal of reducing vulnerability. A third perspective that is increasingly of interest as well is one that actually takes a little bit more of a wider lens and says, well, resilience can also mean transformation, the transformation of a system that doesn't serve anymore in order to meet the same or similar function as the system that came before. And that the resilience, the process of building resilience is actually to transform into that new type of system. And if we think about those different goals, we also can think about different capabilities that we need to teach actors in a system to achieve it, right? So if we want to make sure that we're remaining stable, what we want is mainly adaptive capacities, which we can define as the ability of systems, institutions, humans, and other organisms to adjust to potential damage, take advantage of opportunities, or to respond to consequences. So where we can anticipate potential challenge, we can we can prepare ourselves for it to happen. We identify potential opportunities that come from these new dynamics, and responding in ways that help us prevent sort of non-beneficial outcomes. But if we're concerned about reduced vulnerability, we can also think about what we call absorptive capacity. So the capacity of individuals, households, or communities to moderate the impact of shocks on their livelihood at the core, right? To say, to what extent are our livelihood strategies diversified enough that the shocks that may happen will not affect us, that we can absorb those shocks and still prosper. And third, we can also think about transformative capacities that we can build at individual, community, or even sort of sectoral levels to create fundamentally new systems when shocks in ecological, economic, or social structures make the existing system untenable. All right, so from this theoretical detour, we can ask ourselves some questions in the current big picture of climate change and coffee, which might be, are we considering all relevant perturbations, not just climate, when thinking about resilience and the resilience of the system that we're talking about? Secondly, are activities to increase climate resilience at one level, let's say the sector level, compatible with increasing resilience at another level, the livelihood level, for instance? We would hope that this is the case, but it might be worthwhile to examine this more carefully. Third, when we're building resilience, are we aiming for stability? Are we aiming for reduced vulnerability? And if so, for whom? Who should become less vulnerable? Or are we aiming for transformation? And fourth, in line with those kinds of goals, what types of capabilities and capacities are we actually imparting? And I'll try to start thinking about these questions together with you, but I'm also really happy to then continue the discussion in the Q&A. So one thing that we saw when doing fieldwork in Tanzania and Ethiopia is that although climate change was a very big issue on people's minds, there's other types of shocks and challenges that are even more or similarly important to them, and that they need and are looking for responses at the same time. This includes both regulatory changes of, for instance, marketing, exporting systems at a local level, like who is allowed to sell to whom, who is allowed to process the coffee, in what ways are export channels moderated in ways that, again, sort of help the national sector goals, but may not actually work for farmers, or might need to be improved in that way. So this was a huge concern on people's minds, even before and coming sort of at the same level as climate change. But of course, we also see that there's consuming country regulation changes that Stefan also mentioned that concern the way that where people can export and what kind of requirements are needed for this, that take up a lot of headspace and that may override efforts to also adapt to climate change unless we see these types of things as related and find resilient strategies that tackle more than one at the same time. Secondly, if we're thinking about these different levels and these different goals of resilience at different levels, of course, ideally, we want to make sure that they're all in alignment. But I think maybe I might make a provocation, which is that this may not necessarily be the case unless we're very intentional about it. I could imagine a scenario where the goal of making sure that the coffee sector is resilient in terms of having sufficient coffee in sufficient places to serve a growing consumer demand and to be resilient to individual shocks in regions leads us to strategies to make sure that as many farmers stay in the system as possible, to just keep farmers in at all necessary costs, because we want to make sure that we still have our morning coffee. And while that is important, if this does not come alongside efforts to make sure that those coffee growing communities do have sustainable livelihoods, do have living incomes, and are able to meet their needs via coffee production, it does not serve the end of having household level stability or improvements in livelihood quality and household livelihood resilience. And I could imagine a scenario, and I hope this is not the case, where we continue to support farmers just enough so that they hang in the system, in a system where they may already be marginalized, where they already may be struggling from price shocks, from competition from elsewhere, from quality requirements that they're struggling to meet, and in which they're sort of hanging in without thriving. And so what I would like to sort of also throw into the discussion is, how do we make choices of providing farmers with opportunities, of also saying maybe for some communities, for some individuals in some places where the climate shocks are going to be greatest, we might want to support them to step out of coffee and into systems that we're working better for them. And those who want to continue, how can we help them step up to actually improve their earnings, improve the value that they can capture in the chain, such that coffee production is and continues to be a prosperous livelihood strategy for them, right? And in order to make that sort of stepping up happen, what would need to occur at the same time as imparting climate change resilience or adaptation strategies at an agronomic level, we would need to also see what in literature we call upgrading strategies that allow farmers to capture more value. And we did a first analysis of 160 projects that are self-described as climate change related in the coffee sector. This was before doing field work, coming from a web search of project descriptions around the world. And the positive thing here is that we did find a number of strategies, of upgrading strategies that allow farmers to sort of step up in this way, right? Well, Stefan briefly mentioned carbon credits. We can discuss more how much carbon credits may support livelihoods, but linking farmers to carbon markets in that way might be a way to improve their overall income portfolio. We also saw projects that are linking this climate change adaptation to certification. We can also discuss to what extent the evidence is there that this is a proven livelihood improvement strategy, but at least it's a stepping stone. We saw some quality improvement projects. We saw some ideas where it was really focusing on making productivity improvement, but resilient productivity that is becoming more resilient over time. And importantly, and this is also something that Stefan mentioned, we're also particularly looking for projects that support diversification or alternative livelihood, like supporting the search for potential alternative crops. So we saw all of those, but what we also saw is that over half of the project, at least according to their self-description, did none of these things. Instead, they imparted certain types of climate smart practices, which is useful, but without supporting this upgrading scenario, without supporting farmers to improve their incomes. What is worrisome is that these types of projects might actually support farmers to hang in a system that might not be working very well for them. When we think about the capacities that these types of projects build, we also saw again that it's mainly adaptive capacities, very much focused on resource conservation, on making sure that the production system itself becomes more adaptive. And this is well and good, that is very necessary. But in terms of absorptive capacities, right, we could think about, again, diversification or agroforestry. We saw some of those transformative capacities in training people to think about the range of livelihood options that they have to support different types of agricultural production, to maybe support them to change into more processing of coffee or of changing to alternative crops, we saw very little of that. And so here is sort of where I throw the gauntlet and say, if this is not really being supported in projects, could we find a way to make this happen? And if it's not the coffee sector and coffee roasters or buyers that support this, which is also, of course, a, you know, it's a high order to ask them to support farmers to move out of coffee. Who should be taking that? Interestingly enough, when we looked onto the ground, we did see the wide range of practices and capacities, including sort of spontaneous transformation. So in Tanzania, especially in the north, where the climate is becoming a little bit more tough for coffee, we saw a lot of shifting to other crops that producers did on their own because they found that those other crops are more valuable. Where we might sort of see the potential for the need of support is that it tends to happen, at least as far as we could tell, in very sort of clustered ways. Somebody starts to grow carrots because there's an export opportunity, then everybody starts to grow carrots, and we have, again, a situation where we might overfill the demand, right? We might oversupply. So how can we find ways to make these types of more transformative steps in ways that are smart, that are resilient, that are long-lasting? In Ethiopia, similarly, we see spontaneous transformation, especially in a shifting to cod cultivation, which some farmers say is easier and more beneficial to them in economic outcomes than coffee. We can again discuss, is that something that is desirable at a national, at an international level? It is happening. If they are shifting towards this, are there other potential things that they might shift towards, or that we might help sort of allow them to understand the potential other alternative choices as well? What we also see is an intention that, or sort of an imagination that coffee farming might be moving into highland areas, right? Because the climate is going to become more suitable there. Again, with an interesting question mark surrounding what does it mean if coffee is shifting? Who is doing the shifting? Will it be current coffee farmers that are moving plots and buying plots in different places? Will it be people that already have plots and are growing other things that now need to be trained in growing coffee as this coffee moves upstream? Like, what does it mean for the individual farmers and farming communities when we have these types of strategies of even of transformation of where the production is located? So I'll close with these types of questions to reflect on, and I'm going to add one that I think will be particularly interesting to hear from people, which is, if we're now saying that transformation might also be an option, what could this transformation look like, and who will lead it and who will follow, right? Whose responsibility will it be to develop pathways towards transformation and to support those endeavors? And how can we make sure that, especially, and I really like what Stefan was saying as sort of a closing point, how can we make sure that what we're doing is just presenting options to farmers, presenting them with possibilities that and empower them to make their own choices of where to go? So that's it for me. Thank you so much, and I'd be happy to discuss more.
Thank you so much, Janina, for this very interesting talk. It's also visible we have already some questions in the Q&A, so I think this is really a topic that is, kind of involving the people, really. And so please, we have 10 minutes now of questions and answers. So if you in the audience still have a question, please just ask it right now. So I would start with one question that was already posed quite early in your talk. So maybe it was partly already a bit answered, but I think it also points a bit to your own experience or your own perspective. It is, do farmers believe that climate change is going to make them worse off in the future? And do they believe in the adaptation solutions proposed to them, from your experience, maybe?
Yeah, that's a really good point. I'll only be able to give sort of first thoughts about an answer because, again, as I said, in our data, we're still analyzing it. What we found is that with farmers in general, right, it is easier to gauge their climate change experiences if we're talking more about a short term. So like weather pattern changes. How did you experience in the past certain types of precipitation or heat types of changes, because they may not necessarily have sort of the reference frame of knowing what we talk about when we talk about climate change and the long-term consequences of it. So my instinct from what we've seen so far, but again, I would have to look into the data more carefully with my team, is that there's an extent to which there are clearly experiences that are already there. There is also a guess that this is going to become worse, not necessarily because very strong, like an academic approach to climate modeling, but just the expectation that if this is already happening, it might continue in the same direction. And the extent to which farmers believe that the solutions that are given to them will actually solve the problem, this is not something that we've asked them in that way. So that's a really interesting question. I think, again, there are studies that are not from our data that show that it's most useful if you show farmers like things, right? Again, through farmer field schools and others, of where they can see change, they can see the usefulness of different types of practices in farm plots. So in that sense, will definitely be possibilities of showcasing that, okay, in these types of, let's say, more diverse agroforestry systems, we have lower heat, we have more protection from extreme weather events, for instance. Surely that will be useful, but whether or not it's something that they think will solve the problem, I can't really answer.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Yeah, I think the first part that you answered or mentioned right now is also something that we experience with Coffee and Climate. That is a bit the unfortunate situation that the impacts or let's say the effects of climate change need to become more impactful, or as they are becoming more impactful right now, farmers are noticing more how urgent it is to take action, I think, and I think we are already fully in that situation, and that is really yeah, it's a sad situation, of course. And so yeah, I think I can just confirm that. Also another question that came up here that is maybe also going a bit into that direction, I don't know if you have an answer to that. How much adaptation is needed in local contexts to achieve a change towards climate resilience? Is there a benchmark? If you don't have an answer, it's totally fine. But
yeah, I mean, I think this is a good discussion question. Right? What's the benchmark? And it's actually an interesting question of how do we measure resilience, right? Like, how can we say that a system is or is not resilient? And unfortunately, I think usually this is only possible if you experience shocks and then you see, well, how did the system fare, so to say, right? So in a given community, you can try to build this resilience. You can try to introduce these adaptation strategies on farm, off farm, diversification of incomes, and then test it, so to say, okay, the next time that a heat wave hits or the next time that the rains are irregular, how many of the producers are truly affected in terms of their food security, in terms of their incomes, how many of them have now alternative, like either have the absorptive capacity in the sense of going out to other income streams, have the adaptive capacity where they say it didn't affect my farm because I implemented these changes. And so it's this unfortunate situation where usually, as far as I can tell, and maybe you have different experiences, but you only see the results of your efforts in a situation that you don't hope for, which is that there's another shock that hits, and you hope that the recovery is going to be faster and the impact is going to be less than in the alternative scenario.
Yeah, so rather when you really have the comparison of events happening again after you have implemented some resilience strategies. Yeah, I understand. So then I think we still have time for a final question. Yeah, Janina, you also mentioned these different resilience ambitions within the value chain. So the different stakeholders, basically, for them, resilience means something different, like for the producer, for the coffee industry, for example. And from your perspective, what do you think? How could a harmonization of these different resilience ambitions look like?
So for me, I think obviously it's important, like the sector as such, the industry as such, obviously they will have their own objectives. But personally for me, and I think, for instance, the Coffee and Climate Initiative is actually a good example of this. It would be useful to build from the micro to the macro, right? And to say only if the communities that we're working with have this individual livelihood resilience, then we can think about the holistic sector resilience. And so to me, it would be a question of saying, let us work within the communities, thinking more about a livelihood perspective, thinking also maybe there are certain farmers or certain communities where they will be thriving more in these next climate conditions because they're currently too high and the weather impacts was going to be better. So to support those that are going to thrive, to also support those with who have the ability to sort of adapt their systems in ways that will make sure that they're in a good situation as is, but to work with others and to work also, again, this is why I was bringing up the question of who's responsible for transformation, to be reaching out to other stakeholders, especially in a landscape of saying, are there benefits or are there ways to collaborate of moving some people or like helping some people to move to other areas, if that is, or other opportunities, if that is what is best for them. So to rank the individual resilience, so to say, higher than the sector and build from the individual to the sector, rather than ranking the sector resilience higher and saying, well, we need the coffee, so we need the farmers, so we're going to make sure that whatever is needed to keep the farmers in the system is done, right? And so I think just making that type of prioritization, baking that into any sort of climate change strategy on a firm level or on a sector level, is the only way that this can be done in a good conscience, from my perspective.
Yeah, sounds really good. Thank you, Janina. I think this is also actually what the Initiative for Coffee and Climate is trying to do, like really focus on the needs of the farmers. So yeah, thank you very much for your time, for this interesting talk, also for your discussion. And yeah, I hope you stay a bit and you have the time to follow the symposium.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for the opportunity to share some thoughts.
Okay. Bye, Janina. Then I would, yeah, basically we are already still having some more questions in the audience, but time is asking us to move on to the next talk. Our next guest is 𝗕𝗲𝗵𝗁. Christian is agricultural economist at the Alliance of Biodiversity International in 𝗕𝗲 in Colombia. Hi, Christian. I think you're connected from Colombia today as well, right?
Yeah, good morning. Yeah, I am in Colombia at the Alliance headquarters in Cali.
Okay, yeah, welcome. Christian is a scientist for climate action in coffee and cocoa, and he has over 10 years of experience working with climate impacts on coffee. His work combines data insights with participatory research to prioritize solutions for farmers. And yeah, Christian, you're going to present to us today coffee crops under climate stress, impacts of climate change on coffee production from global to local. So yeah, I'm just handing over to you, please.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, first of all, I really appreciated Janina's intervention, and I believe it's hopefully a very good basis for what I will present here today. I hope you can see my presentation now. So I would like to add a dimension to what Janina already presented, and it's the dimension of how do we work with stressors and hazards coming from climate to integrate them into a holistic adaptation strategy. We're very much aligned on the idea that resilience and adaptation to climate change should focus on should have a livelihoods perspective and put the producer at the forefront and the producer's interests and build from the bottom up. But at the same time, we have this global climate change issue. And so how do we integrate the livelihoods perspective with hazards is what I'm hoping to, hopefully I can present that here today. So the climate risks are often very abstract. These are common graphs from the IPCC showing increases in temperature and how these potential threats to agriculture, to systems are result from these climatic changes. Now, the problem is that with these global assessments, we can design global policy, but we cannot influence global interventions, local interventions to build resilience. On a more local scale, climate change, of course, looks like this. It looks like a water-stressed plants, which starts to abort fruits. It may look come in the form of pests and diseases. The rust epidemic is a widely cited example of something that was likely worsened by increasing temperatures. Although, as Janina already said, this is also a key example of how producers face multiple stresses, and low prices were likely a contributing factor to this. So it's not always climate, but yeah, it's always management. It depends on the locality. Climate change may come in the form of landslides, more of a landscape scale impact, floodings, heat stress, low humidity, but it could also be irregular rainfalls affecting flowering management, drying, processing on farm. So we're talking about a lot of potential hazards and a lot of potential stressors which could affect coffee production. We started having more of a global perspective when we started all of this work. We really wanted to know what is the potential impact of climate change. And back then, climate change always seemed to be more of a future perspective, whereas right now we're already talking about something that's ongoing and unfolding. So when we looked at suitable areas for coffee production, we saw that as a result of climate change and intermediate emission scenarios, there will likely be a reduction of the potential area, the available area where coffee could be produced. Mostly a shift in altitude as a result of increasing temperatures, and we see large uncertainty about precipitation. So global models do not really have the skill to give a clear outlook about the direction of precipitation. So in most regions, the impact would be negative only in higher altitudes, as you can see here in East Africa or in the Andean regions. It would be positive, and a little bit towards the higher latitudes, impacts could be possible. This relates a little bit to what Janina said, that adaptation can have multiple dimensions, and the question is, do we aim at stability, or do we aim at transformation? And of course, what we are aiming at in our view should depend on the potential impact of climate change. Now, going back to the multiple dimensions of multiple scales where climate change adaptation happens, coffee is, of course, a globally traded product. And this is really where some of the good news are, really, because the same drivers that drive climate change, economic growth, population growth, urbanization, they also drive coffee demand. And if we project these, we should always work under the assumption that there will actually be higher coffee demand in the future than there is today, and I believe we see this on the markets. Global coffee production is growing despite all the climate stresses. So this is really the reason why we should work, invest in climate action, climate adaptation, because those who are prepared will have potentially have access to a growing market. To summarize briefly, so that we have a whole a large number of potential stresses for the coffee system. This is a spelling mistake, abiotic stresses, drought, high humidity, heat. Then we have these indirect biotic stresses, pests and diseases. We have landscape scale impacts, and all of that results in less suitable area, which implies a transformational change. But at the same time, we have a growing coffee market, which would imply that we should also aim in certain region, at stability and increasing production and livelihoods. So how can the coffee sector implement climate action, SDG 13 of the Sustainable Development Goals? What we always have to consider is the interrelationship between adaptation and mitigation. Mitigation is the reduction or removal of greenhouse gas emissions wherever possible, whereas adaptation is about building resilience to climate change. At the same time, of course, we do have this need for improved livelihoods, which could hopefully be achieved through a sustainable increase of agricultural productivity and incomes, also to meet future market demand. So we do need more coffee. We argue that greenhouse gas emissions in coffee production are really need to be contextualized with the carbon stocks which are already existing in existing coffee systems. High shade systems can be carbon sinks because they have so much carbon stocks already on farm. In the production, greenhouse gas emissions mostly come from fertilizer and fermentation, fertilizer application and the fermentation of coffee. Now, as you can imagine, changes to these production practices could have a cost to coffee producers, whereas at the same time, increasing carbon stocks can also have a cost in the form of reduced productivity. So when we take a systemic view, this needs to be considered from a livelihoods perspective as a farmers. Now, why do we put adaptation first when we talk about emissions reduction? Compared to a primary forest or secondary forest, the carbon stocks in an agroforestry system will be reduced. However, compared to alternative agriculture production, which is often on open land, agroforestry systems actually have more carbon stocks. So we argue that in the coffee sector, we believe that at first we should maintain those carbon stocks which are already existing in coffee farms today. Second, we need to avoid migration into forests because that is actually one of the largest emission sources in the coffee sector. And we should aim to expand in degraded areas. And doing this, we can maintain existing carbon stocks by doing no harm and perhaps reduce emissions from coffee. Because reducing carbon emissions through a change of on-farm practices can have a cost, this may cause harm to the farmers and needs to be considered really carefully. Now, we think that the first three can be achieved by adapting existing producers. We maintain the carbon stocks, we avoid migration, this spontaneous, autonomous adaptation, which could happen in the form of migrating to higher altitudes. And we can support a guided transformation into degraded areas if we're able to adapt existing producers. To add to the complexity that Janina already mentioned, she touched on that. Adaptation happens on multiple timescales. Compared to the business as usual scenario based on traditional knowledge, climatic changes happen on multiple time scales here. We're talking about a change in the operational decisions where the outlook of days to weeks can be very uncertain because the onset of the dry or the wet season does no longer follow a regular pattern, but may be changing so that these operational decisions when to apply fertilizer, when to start your cropping calendar cycle, can be threatened compared to the old calendars. Then we talk about tactical decisions based on seasonal outlooks, changes in the variability. Do we have an El Niño? Do we have La Niña? Will it rain more? Will it rain less? Those are critical decisions for producers to achieve resilience. And finally, mostly when we talk about climate change, because it's about long-term climate, we're talking about strategic decisions which play out over decades. So the transformational change is probably something that happens over decades, but also stability, and there are certain decisions that are important for stability and improving production practices, which happen on decadal timescales. In our work, we usually focus on these strategic decisions, these long-term decisions, because we believe they're really important for perennial systems such as coffee. Theoretically, it should be simple. We analyze the climate characteristics. We analyze the degree of impact, as I already showed. Question is, do we transform? Do we face large stresses and hazards? Or do we actually have lower degrees of impact? And then hazards, finally, what is causing these changes? What are the hazards that cause the change over long term? And we should find a set of practices and analyze costs and barriers to scale solutions which are acceptable at local scale. So in theory, this should be simple, but in practice, it's quite hard. So first, going back to this idea that adaptation should, because we're talking about a strategic decision of the long term, we need to know, are we talking about what we call incremental adaptation, which is about remaining in coffee, intensifying, improving livelihood around coffee, because it remains a viable livelihood through minor adaptations to the system, like improved pest and disease management, soil and fertility management, which increase the resilience. Then intermediate impacts, really adaptation with large adjustments. Is the climate changing to a degree that we need to focus, for example, on new varieties which are better adapted to the future climate? They will be there for 20 years, so we need to think from the start. Do we want to talk about improved water management and really invest in infrastructure? That is probably a very deep change when you compare it with from a rain-fed system to a irrigated system. And also, yeah, diversification with other crops. Sorry, I doubled that there. Diversification with other crops is such a systemic change which responds to large risks to livelihoods and introduces this possibility to transform, where when as climate change evolves over time, adaptation does not appear to be feasible in the long run. We can already start to anticipate that by including new crops and establishing alternative value chains to secure the livelihoods of the producers. And this is where this is no longer about the coffee sector. This is about the producer and their livelihoods and their rights to dignified lives. When we identify stressors and hazards, we do like to not only rely on a single data source. Future projections are very uncertain, especially about precipitation. For temperatures, they all agree on a direction, but for precipitation, some models say that they reduce precipitation or increase precipitation. Same with observed trends. As climate change is evolving, not everything is statistically significant, but it can be very relevant. And we can use that together with an analysis of climate extremes to understand perceptions of locals. So as we're discussing with producers how to change their system, they will usually have a perception of how the climate has already started to affect their system. And we propose to put this at the center, but link it to future projections, observed trends, and climate variability, because perceptions can be really biased by recency and recent events. So once we have these stressors and hazards identified, shown that these are likely to continue over time, we usually have a set of practices, good agricultural practices, which we know can manage some of these hazards. But we also know there's usually very good reason why people do not use them. So this slide is in Spanish. I hope this is still understandable. And only focusing on extension services and training is not sufficient. It is a key component of an integrated adaptation strategy or an integrated adaptation approach, but this always needs to be complemented with access to credits, innovation to local solutions, low-cost local solutions, access to improved markets, quality markets, because we're talking about sustainable practices. And very often this is also about improving cooperation at local scale, for example, to access to seeds and access to soil inputs, organic fertilizers to improve soil structure. These depend on local cooperation. So that means adaptation strategies always go beyond farm. We cannot put the burden of adaptation only on the farmer. Yes, there are practices that need to be changed depending on the degree of change, but we need to support these strategies and enablers to support the change within the farming system. Weather stations, crop insurances, developing new value chains. These are things farmers cannot do on their own. And these are crucial enablers for change, be it transformative change, systemic change, or incremental change. Yeah, and one last aspect I'd like to emphasize, that we're working with the Neumann Foundation, and so one problem with the climate analysis is that acquiring climate data is sometimes requires at least a geographer with some basic knowledge about climate. And with our 𝗥𝗲𝗺𝗺.org platform, we try to visualize some of the climate data, provide an understanding of some of the risks and threats from climate change to coffee and cocoa. Cocoa is also there, and provide a first primer of what could specific actions at these locations could look like, prioritized by these hazards. And in the end, you can generate a report and start discussing with the producers in the local regions, what do they need to make this change happen in the end. And yeah, with that, I would like to close. I hope this presentation will be made available so that you can also find some of our local guidance work and publications in the presentation. And with that, I would like to close and thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Christian Bunn. Yeah, to your question, we are recording this whole symposium, and we will make at least the recording available later on our YouTube channel. Yeah, thanks for your talk. I think there's yeah, we really see how this whole topic is being, yeah, I mean, you mentioned some points that were mentioned before, for example, like that we cannot put the burden of solving the issues of climate change on farmers alone. So that was already a big part of the video that we watched earlier today. And I think that is very clear. Also, you elaborated further and made it clear that something that Janina already mentioned, that yeah, that there are these different levels of adaptation for the farmers, like what you mentioned, that it's either coping, adjusting, or maybe even transform the system, so where it is necessary, so that we really have to look how is the local situation for the farmers and what can be done there in terms of adaptation. So I have a question now, because you mentioned 𝗥𝗲𝗺 as a tool, and also, yeah, you talked about extension services that are yeah, helping or supporting the farmers with practical and strategic support. And yeah, but specifically also all this information that you shared here, like where it comes to the information on the situation or trends on local levels. How is this information actually being made accessible to the farmers, so that really to enable them to develop their own adaptation strategies? And yeah, how is this access process being done in practice?
Yeah, thank you. So we, in our experience, when we expose producers directly to climate information, it's overwhelming for them. It's something they often lack. Not everyone. I mean, there are very, very smart people out there, but generally, we're talking about a population who may not be familiar with climate bar charts, with maps. They appreciate something that speaks to their experiences, but they cannot directly interpret it. So what we're proposing is that 𝗥𝗲𝗺 is really a platform to inform extension services. Because extensionists, I work with a host of problems where people need support, pest and disease management, EUDR regulation compliance, zero child labor. So we hope that the platform gives access to all of this information, which can be very complex, and provides a practical entry point for technicians, project planners in the regions who would like to plan a resilience project for a specific locality and would like to skip costly climate analysis and directly access the data to start working on the ground to develop these integrated approaches that we're advocating for.
Okay, so and do you have some specific examples, like where you have already, yeah, in some regions, maybe around Colombia, or where you?
So yeah, no, I appreciate two examples. First, of course, this came out of an old collaboration with the Neumann Foundation a few years back. And the way it's being applied by the Coffee and Climate Initiative is to increase knowledge around climate change in workshops and demonstrate what climate change may look like. So go beyond rumors, something you see in the news or something you see in the field, but really have that backed up by robust climate data in workshops for training, so that they can speak competently about future climate change when they talk to farmers. The second, we're taking this to cocoa and Africa at the moment, and we have one example where we heard that our information was used for a funding application, actually, where the local organization said, we need a climate resilience plan, we need to apply for funding. And this is our starting point. This is what the Alliance says. This is what the data says. And these are the concrete actions that we would like to implement. So we think that this is also a very nice application of our tool.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Christian, thank you so much. Yeah, I would say we continue now with the next topic. Thank you very much for giving us this insight and also diving a bit more into the topics that have been touched very slightly before. That was really helpful to get a deep dive and your scientific perspective particularly.
Yeah, thank you very much for your invitation. It's always a pleasure to be able to talk about our work. And yeah, I look forward to the rest of the seminar. Thank you.
Okay, great. Bye. So our next speaker and also the final speaker of this first block about the impacts of climate change is Dr. 𝗕𝗲𝗵𝗁. Hello, Tina. Welcome.
Hello, thank you.
Dr. 𝗕𝗲𝗵𝗁, she's an agricultural scientist and project manager at the Center for Development Research at the 𝗕𝗲 in Bonn, Germany. Right now you're also located in Bonn, or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So same time zone. I think our audience is really coming from all over the world. That's why we picked an afternoon session to really make this symposium available for many people, but then for you it's also in the afternoon. Okay. Some words on you, Tina. You're conducting research on basically a full bouquet of topics, as I see. It's food security, adaptation of agriculture to climate change, sustainability standards, global supply chains, human rights, and social justice. I think that is a very interesting collection, and also I think that enabled you basically to develop the food security standard together with the private sector and civil society. And this food security standard integrates the human right to food into global agricultural supply chains. I hope I said it all correctly. Okay, and now in your talk, Tina, you will focus on the food security situation in Central and Latin America. And yeah, basically because food security, we mentioned it before also, it's a very critical or relevant topic when it comes to climate change, particularly in the coffee growing regions. So I think you will also touch the topic of certifications and cooperatives in this topic. So yeah, I'm very much looking forward to your talk. The floor is yours.
Thanks a lot, Annika, for this wonderful introduction, and thanks again for the invitation to be able to speak here today. I'm very excited also about the knowledge exchange and learning from each other and learning from the different perspectives of the previous speakers. I think this presentation now will fit very nicely in the framework of what was presented. Let me check. It's loading. Yeah, so you should see the presentation. Yeah, I will talk today. It has a little bit evolved from what you introduced. I will really talk about food security for smallholder producers under climate change. And you all know, who are sitting here in the audience, the main coffee exporting countries, and you're probably also very much aware that the export of coffee is a very important revenue for the countries, and many countries also use the coffee revenues to import food. And you can see here on the right side that it's happening in Latin America, in some countries, in Africa in some countries, and in Asia amongst the main coffee exporting countries. So despite the food imports and the use of coffee revenues for that, you can see on a similar stretch where the coffee belt is actually very high degrees of food insecurity. So this is what is shown with the FAO hunger map, where it concentrates on the levels of undernourishment in several countries. The darker red the color is, the higher the degrees of undernourishment. To put that more concretely, under the figures of the main exporting countries, you see here some data on the levels of undernourishment. When you still think, oh, maybe they don't look even as bad as you expected, I want to disillusionize you a little bit, because the level of undernourishment really depicts only a severe lack in calories. And in reality, food insecurity starts much, much earlier. So it starts when you have a micronutrient deficiency, like not having enough iron in your diet and in your body, vitamin A deficiencies, zinc deficiencies, which also affect your physical ability, children's growth, etc. It also hides the data, the low dietary diversity, which often is occurring before you have a lack of calories, and a low dietary quality. Which all are part of actually being food insecure. So you might still be caloric-wise not undernourished, but you can live only on maize and beans for months, and everybody probably agrees, or on plantain, as it was in my Nicaragua case study. And you all would agree that this is insufficient for being well-nourished and a productive person or household. And in addition, what is important to acknowledge, the levels of food insecurity concentrate really in rural areas. So the main people affected are smallholder farmers and the landless laborers. Important also, it's also the landless laborers working as day laborers on smallholder farms. So this is where the hunger is concentrating. And by looking at our recent research and also previous research we have conducted in Central America, also what other researchers found out, many coffee farmers, we really talk about coffee farmers, they experience several months of extreme food insecurity. So that can range from 3 months up to 8 months of having not enough food. Like I mentioned in Nicaragua, the case, some lived for 3 months on plantain and salt, basically. Yet at the same time, we have to point out, not all smallholders are the same. So we talk actually about a huge, huge heterogeneous group. And of course, there are smallholders, whom I also have met, who live around the poverty line or even above the poverty line, like some farmers I met in Colombia. So we must be aware, we really talk about a group, a big continuum from middle class smallholders to those living in extreme poverty. The linkages, some were mentioned already with the climate change that is affecting the coffee production, which is then, I don't delve now into the details of that, that was presented beforehand and in the movie. But the problem is the coffee production is affected. You have lower yields, lower quality, which decreases the coffee income. And then you have the increase in food insecurity, where most projects then start, or a lot was discussed here, especially by Christian, we have to support and strengthen the coffee production. And as it was previously by Stefan pointed out, that is not the full story, because there are more reasons why farmers are food insecure. And that is in one part, I think that was also mentioned by Janina, the high price volatility with these lengthy periods of prices below production costs. And for most farmers, it means when you have smallholder farmers, when you have production prices at or below production costs, you are not covering your food needs anymore in these times, not at all. Many farmers face a high coffee dependence, then with volatile prices that hits, of course, further in. Farms are often not very diversified, and some farmers also have limited options actually for diversification, be it on their farm and off their farm. So that depends, again, according to regions. In the Nicaraguan research, farmers had basically limited land and were growing at an altitude where vegetables, for example, wouldn't really grow well. So diversification options were limited there. In Kenya, the farms we visited, they were highly diversified and were rather hit by the next point, especially by small plot sizes. Labor shortages come in, poverty levels, of course. Indebtedness of farmers is a key issue. Many farmers just live from one credit to the next credit and never come out of this vicious cycle of actually paying extremely high interest rates, especially of the microcredits. We face, of course, also a lack of infrastructure, which is then contributing to food insecurity due to high expenditures on other sides, a limited governmental support for the sector in many countries. And as mentioned before, we have the rising food and input prices continuously or on and off, depending to major shocks on the supply chains. So in the recent years, it was the COVID-19 crisis, the Russian war, before we had the financial crisis, etc. So in a nutshell, we really have many, many reasons coming together why actually farmers are food insecure. And then the question is, what do we do as it was discussed, what can we do actually to support farmers now in this situation, and also to find out really how is their food security levels in certain areas, and how we can actually, we can do to improve the coffee plantation and at the same time address food security. So we addressed that in one research with Fernando Rodriguez-Camayo. He is a PhD student at CEF, working together also with SEAT Alliance, and also in collaboration with the Hans Neumann Foundation. So this broad collaboration is highly appreciated. And we looked at Honduras, departing from the idea that climate smart agricultural practices have the potential to improve resilience and adapt to climate change, but also that literature started to point out that there are differences between actually farmers' priorities and needs, and what is provided as support in terms of climate smart agricultural practices. And often needs like food security are neglected or forgotten. So the question is really, what are best adaptation strategies that could address farmers' vulnerability or maybe their resilience to climate change, and at the same time address food security? So we worked in that case study in the dry corridor on Honduras with certified smallholder coffee farmers. They were organic and fair trade certified, and started to get support also to adapt their plantations to climate change. So when asking the households by what were their biggest risks and shocks they experienced in the past years, that was drought, pests, diseases, and low coffee prices. And in some cases, it led really well, not in some cases, over half of the farms were impacted. And again, then they had partial or total yield losses, which in consequence led to a reduction at on-site food consumption from the farmers. And if available, they used savings or tried to get loans where possible. The response from the different coffee stakeholders, especially then to the climate change events, were at first sight mainly concentrating on the coffee plantation. So a lot regarding climate smart agricultural practices, as they were already presented, and to a much minor degree addressing household food security through, for example, loans, beans or maize seeds, or the provision of fertilizer, which could have been also used for food crops. Food insecurity was in that region a key issue. As you can see here in orange, it's all households which were food insecure. So we talk around more or less on average around 50% of households being food insecure, but it was very clear in our region that the more or the less diversified farmers were, or the more dependent on coffee, the higher their food insecurity levels actually were. The key drivers of food insecurity were more or less the same I mentioned before. What was very interesting to see that, well, there was a very low dietary diversity amongst the households, and you also couldn't buy vegetables and fruits really in the local markets and locally available shops. However, in that region, also fruits and vegetables were produced, but these were rather than sold in public markets or supermarkets in the departmental capitals, so quite far away actually from where the smallholder farmers lived. So they had a demand actually for more diverse diets, but they couldn't even access the vegetables despite their production on site. So what we can preliminarily conclude, the PhD study is still ongoing and hopefully soon to be finished, but we are still in the result analysis and publications. What we can clearly see that the diversity farm households were more resilient to extreme events and less food insecure. But it's really important to look beyond the coffee production system and incorporate a food security perspective. So looking at the availability of food on farm, off farm, the access to it, the stability of supplies, and also addressing healthy and diversified diets. And in part, that could be in that region achieved through income diversification, working on vegetables, fruits, and maybe livestock production. So the strategies applied so far in that region focused, as presented, more on maize, beans, and maybe family gardens. But for that area, what we saw that linking farmers to local markets and starting with a profitable farm business production of vegetables and fruits would be actually even better option for the farmers. That would require then, of course, training, really establishing of market linkages. And there we could see or could identify that the coffee cooperatives, if their statutes would allow for that, could actually play an important role in promoting and supporting the required changes, given their expertise in the coffee sector. So leaving the case study, coming back to a more general picture again, because that was specific Honduras Dry Corridor, to response options for the coffee sector regarding food security. So we have the question, Janina mentioned, resilience for whom and for what? So what do we really want to achieve? And that also depends, of course, the measures we choose. And I want to make a strong call to really, in any adaptation measures, look, I mean, food security is a key starting point from my personal point of view, because without that, how can you even be productive in a household and participate in society and manage your farm? So you can and must, of course, think around through stabilizing and increasing, adapting the coffee production. But in many areas, that's probably also implying a decrease on the dependency on coffee, diversify farms, link farmers to profitable local value chains and markets, and not only doing some household gardening, but really thinking what could be profitable other on-farm business, and hopefully looking also at off-farm income options, because in some areas, especially if land sizes are too small, there's no way you can even more diversify, as we saw in our Kenya example, but you would need other income options. Address policy changes, financing, especially for the coffee cooperatives, maybe offering pre-financing, stable contracts, and include more gender responsive approaches. We heard Stefan saying that at the beginning. I highly appreciated that. And look at human rights-based approaches and look more what we can do also from a human rights perspective, especially giving the German due diligence law and the European due diligence laws coming up. Yeah, and it's of course about a shared responsibility within the coffee supply chain. And I want to provide some options now in the next few minutes on that. So very, very important is as long as we have hunger in the value chains, the human right to adequate food and other related human rights are not fulfilled. And that basically means the right to life in dignity is not fulfilled. And we very often forget, actually, we talk always about livelihoods of farmers and think of this and that and well-being and sending children to school, but we forget to look actually at the food security situation. And only until recently, there was hardly any data really collected on what is the food security situation of smallholder coffee farmers. And then you have, of course, if farmers are food insecure, you have a lot of other problems, be it ecological problems, sending children to work instead of to school, not being able to comply with your human rights due diligence, etc. Sustainability standards are often promoted as one important solution to many problems and to address risks and governments' problems in global supply chains. But also sustainability standards have often forgotten actually to include or really address food security and the human right to adequate food. And there's growing evidence that also in certified supply chains, food insecurity is common, which I also just presented the study case from Honduras. So I briefly want to talk as a means what we developed, actually what could be done, the so-called food security standard. It was developed by a German NGO called 𝗷𝗺𝗇𝗺, the 𝗕𝗲𝗵 Foundation, the World Wildlife Foundation, and us, the Center for Development Research, and is now managed by 𝗷𝗺𝗇𝗺 and a private sector business, the 𝗕𝗺 Solutions. And still financed by the German government. Yeah, the food security standards actually works on addressing the human right to food and other human rights. It's not a standalone standard, but it's actually designed as an add-on standard and can be integrated in any sustainability standard. It sets up to really ensure and control that all farmers, farm workers are food secure and local communities are not negatively affected, and that the human rights are fulfilled with. So actually it is in compliance with the German rights due diligence law and fulfilling as an add-on all what is needed there. It offers, as any standard, of course, a full toolbox, which ex-ante assessments, guidance for the auditors, so they have a real questionnaire elaborated how to easily assess food security, because that was missing beforehand, or is missing in most sustainability standards who might have included a phrase on food insecurity or food security. And yeah, the good news is for the coffee sector, you have already in the 4C certification, they included the FSS as an add-on, so you can apply that already on your 4C certified farm if you're or smallholder groups if you're interested in. And the first coffee certified coffee of this is also already on the market. So 4C has developed all the necessary checklists and audit guidance as you would expect. And it's actually a very practical example showing that you can address food security and human rights due diligence also in the coffee sector. What is also key, and it was previously mentioned, it shouldn't be only dumped on the coffee producers, but of course the rest of the value chain actors, that is the buyers, the roasters, and the consumers must also be interested, demanded, and actually be willing to pay an adequate price for it. So for those farms who might not, where many food insecure farmers, smallholders exist, they can't be certified under food security standard. But then we have this tool called food security sensitive management, which is offering a progressive pathway and guidance how to actually over years come to be able to comply with the FSS standard. And with that, I want to sum up, highlighting again that food security is an important, really crucial issue amongst smallholder coffee producers. It is a problem since decades, and the climate change is definitely worsening the food security situation. So we need to think about farm and income diversification options with a food security perspective, in addition to adapting the coffee production sites. And food security is not a matter of charity or philanthropy or of nice projects, but really, I want to emphasize, it's a basic human right. And internationally, according to the human rights legislations or agreements, it's an international obligation, not only of the private sector, but also not only of the public sector, but also of the private sector to become engaged. And so it's really part of the shared responsibility, actually, also in terms of downstream private sector actors, and not only of the farmers themselves. So in a nutshell, knowledge is available, collective action is needed. Thank you very much for your attention, and looking forward to your questions. I'll leave that maybe on if somebody wants to note down the contracts, and then I'm stopping the sharing.
Yeah, no, that's a good idea, I think. Yeah, thank you very much, 𝗕𝗲𝗵𝗁, for this very interesting talk and shedding light on this very important topic of food security. So yeah, you basically really emphasized food security as the very first and basic need that needs to be met. So inside all resilience ambitions, this otherwise, yeah, it's like really not possible for the farmers to do anything else to survive. So that is really very basic. So what comes to mind is then just the question, what could be reasons, or what do you think, why is it so that food security is really not more integrated in approaches and standards? I mean, is it a lack of awareness, or are there any barriers? What would you say?
Yeah, thanks. I'm always sometimes surprised why it's actually not calling more attention. And we had many workshops with different stakeholders from the coffee sector, but also in different crops, with palm oil, with cotton, sugarcane, etc. And what we actually really noticed, it is a lack of very often of awareness. People are not really talking to farmers. I mean, they talk about farming problems, but they don't talk really about. They don't even ask, are you food secure? How much are you eating? Is it normal for you to eat really 3 meals a day? And how diverse is your diets? So it's awareness, it's a lack of knowledge. Sometimes it's also, maybe one got used to it. I mean, in some countries, hunger is so normal that we are not even thinking about it. You know, it becomes part of the livelihood. And then we just look at what is more discussed in Europe. It's deforestation, it's child work, child labor. But less food security doesn't have also a very high, let's say nowadays, a very high political agenda. So, well, you asked for barriers, I think. Sometimes it's just also a lack of know-how, maybe from the relevant institutions, how to pursue it. But in the end, what it was mentioned before, I think the knowledge is available, but the different stakeholders need to talk more to each other. Also, what Stefan really mentioned, maybe through joint participatory learning platforms in the countries where you can exchange that knowledge, look what is lacking in the areas, and then find appropriate solutions.
Yeah, so yeah, so basically then this is a first step, like to start talking more about the topic of food security. Yeah, also just putting it on the agenda when cooperating more. So if an organization is coming, okay, we have now the knowledge, this is really an important topic, just very process oriented, what would be or could be first steps to integrate factors which lead to better food security into a concept?
Well, it's very much starting with what is needed and what are the framing conditions at the local context. So as I tried to point out, between the different countries, in Honduras, it was very much different, the situation, than in Nicaragua, than with Kenya. So is it really, what are the limiting factors? Is it small plot size? Is it maybe very degraded soils? Can they actually grow? Do they have the area and the appropriate altitude growing conditions to grow vegetables or not? So that would need to be found out by local assessments. And then I think based on that, the knowledge what could be then individually done is there. I mean, there's so many NGOs working now in every region and projects, and also the local ministries and governmental institutions. They have a lot of knowledge. They lack often the means to implement, but the knowledge is there. So we also talked a lot to them and gained a lot of exciting insights. So also collaborating with the local institutions is very versatile, can bring many benefits. And then, of course, really thinking, going away from local level, but also going more to what can be done from the different stakeholders along the value chain. So looking more at the prices, the contracts, how they are offered with the sports market, or whether maybe we can really make long-term contract arrangements, pre-financing and other things.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, but as a really first step, like just reaching out to local organizations and start talking about the topic. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I still have a few questions here. I think yeah, I think this is something that is related to what we were just talking about, how to turn these results that you mentioned into action. Are there examples from first assessments?
From the food security standard? So the first farms are certified. And that if you need more details about that, you have to contact the people from the food security standard. I am in touch with them, but I can't provide you really details on that. But feel free to contact the food security standard team. They are informed, so they are happy to answer.
Okay, so info gone out to the audience to pop the question. We still have actually a few questions on the same topic, which came up several times. It was about the plot size. So specifically, the question is, how does the suggestion to increase coffee production and diversify farms fit with your result that one of the reasons of food insecurity is insufficient area for farming or small plots?
Thanks for asking that again. I think it points out what I meant with we have to check what is the local context. So Kenya, the farmers were highly diversified and managed around on average 1.5 acres. I mean, that is nothing. I mean, they were already diversified. So there, the solution wouldn't be anymore saying, hey, you need to diversify, but it's rather we need to find in that area other off-farm solutions. They can't be on 1.5 acres. You have a limit what you can do still on farm. So that is what I meant, what you can't do. In Honduras, the farm sizes were bigger in our case study. So there you would still have the potential to actually diversify on their farm. In an Ethiopian case study where we work with agroforestry coffee production systems, so there were also options. In some areas, the farmers had enough area where they, at least for household food production, actually were highly interested in diversifying their coffee farms. So it really depends on the individual area. And there, I think what I meant with local assessments, you need to go through what are the limiting factors and what are the contributing factors to either food insecurity or poverty.
But generally you would say like prioritize food crops over coffee then in that case, or like if you have just limited space, I mean, because I mean, I guess it's difficult because one is a more cash generating crop, but I guess it cannot be answered in a generalized way.
That is a problem. I'm very hesitant to give blueprints because that is what is very often happening, and then it's not working on the ground, and then people say, oh, these people always come with great recommendations and they don't work. I think it's coming more to what Stefan mentioned at the beginning again, offering a portfolio and see what also works with some farmers and what works with others. So if they have maybe already experience in Kenya with livestock keeping, and there is a market for the milk, maybe for some farmers it's more worthwhile going into that direction, and not producing maybe more vegetables. So it's really, really also seeing what are the capacities and what are the interests. I mean, not every farmer wants to become a livestock producer. So it's also that we can't put cows everywhere or goats, what some projects do. No, let's see also really what they would like and correspond and offer portfolios to adjust. And they have different labor constraints maybe. So that's also, I mean, when you have a cow, you have to milk every day. Maybe that doesn't fit because they already have an on-farm income. So it's really going back to, here's a portfolio. What would you like to work with that? And coffee cooperatives have already very good ideas actually what could be done.
Yeah, and I think it's a very important point. This is something that we're going to have a talk on tomorrow as well, like this participatory work, like to really in the regions talk with the different stakeholders. Otherwise, it just does not work, right?
Yeah. That's, I think, what I also meant with collective action. I think it's so much ideas and projects are out there, and they're so compartmentalized. And I think moving these expertise together, also different NGOs offering maybe different ideas. So we have this portfolio. I mean, it doesn't need to be all by one NGO, but this exchange also with governmental institutions to see what can be offered can really, I think, bring more benefits if you pool basically resources and still run your own projects, which of course is also needed for donors, etc.
Yeah, okay. Tina, thank you so much for your talk, for the discussion. That was very fruitful, I think. And yeah, right now, I think we're just heading into a break. I hope you still stay a lot, you maybe come also back tomorrow. Would be lovely to have you around.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Very nice to be here. Also, I find it fantastic that you organize the symposium. It's really great, I think, the whole setup, so to learn from each other. So thanks a lot for the invitation and good luck with the rest. And I will stay, of course.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, so now we have closed the first block, which was shedding a bit light on the impacts of climate change on coffee production regions. And before we move over to the next block, which will dive a bit deeper into solution approaches, also talk about agroforestry, etc., I would like to have a short break and maybe also like to decompress shortly after all the input that we just received, maybe to grab a nice cup of coffee, and then let us meet again in 10 minutes, which is 4:45 Central European time. So just depending on your time zone, but let's meet here back in 10 minutes. Just stay connected. We will be on in 10 minutes. Hello and welcome back after a short break. Just a short info, we posted here in the chat, we posted the links to our newsletter and also to our social media channels. So if you're interested and maybe also want to get informed about future events of Coffee and Climate, please just follow us and subscribe to the newsletter. And Yeah, then we are going to continue now with the second block of our symposium. The first block today was about the impacts of climate change. We learned that adaptation is necessary, that diversification is basically crucial, and that in some cases transition is even inevitable. So we also learned that coffee offers opportunity to not only adapt to climate change for farmers, but also to mitigate climate change. And we saw that approaches really need to be comprehensive to address connected challenges, such as food security, for example. So what is coming up now? Our following talks will show examples of how adaptation of coffee production can be combined with mitigation of climate change, and also other aspects such as, for example, healthier ecosystems and perspectives for youth. So I am happy to welcome our first speaker of this block, Dr. 𝗕𝗲𝗶𝗁. There he is. Or not? Yeah. Hello, Joachim. How are you doing?
Hello, good afternoon or good morning, wherever you are.
Yeah, Dr. 𝗕𝗲𝗶𝗁 is a pioneer in global dissemination of sustainable agriculture practices. And he got inspired by 𝗤𝗏 and his principles of successional ecosystems in forests, and then initiated an experimental journey by implementing these concepts on his farm in Bolivia. And through collaboration with Bolivian partners, he disseminated these learnings on a global scale. I hope that is correct, how I introduced you.
Yeah, thank you. It's okay so far.
Okay, yeah, and then I'm already going to hand over to you. Yeah, Joachim is going to present to us today the concept of dynamic agroforestry systems in coffee cultivation. I think you're sharing yourself. Yeah, great.
Yeah, so let me just, I have to close this window.
Maybe, yeah, exactly there.
Okay.
That looks good.
Now I have to, okay. Once again. So, you see my screen?
Yes, yes, it's
Okay.
the first slide. Perfect.
Thank you. So, yeah, more than a climate shield, I want to give you an overview of what we are doing regarding dynamic agroforestry and how dynamic agroforestry can be, yeah, not only mitigate, but restore and resolve probably many of the problems mentioned also in the other presentations. Now, where okay. Okay, global climate change is a challenge, but to what extent is local climate change perhaps even more relevant for smallholder farmers? I think this is a question we are posing everywhere, because this is part of local climate change, unsustainable coffee fields contributing to runoff of water, to higher temperature, monoculture, a young coffee plantation with bare soil, unsustainable food production. I think this way of cultivation can no longer afford to abuse the soil in this way. We have to take care of our soil. This is not the compost we need for better production. It's often easier to buy a soft drink than to get clean drinking water. Out of sight, out of mind. This is a problem also everywhere, and this is also related to the problems we are discussing. And finally, the common practice everywhere, slash and burn, contributes to global and local climate change, and this is even more relevant for food production. And modern agriculture, who bears the costs in the longer term? So let's start by changing our agricultural practices to mitigate local climate change and ensure decent livelihood for farmers. This is an exercise we did during a workshop with farmers. The effect of the temperature, the daily temperature. The first arrow shows a secondary forest, the difference between the highest temperature and the lowest temperature during the whole day, 6 degrees. Then we have a cocoa field where the differences were about 10 degrees, and an open field where you can see in the left 15.5 degrees. So the vegetation is crucial for the local temperature and to buffer extreme temperatures. To better understand the requirements of the coffee tree, we should also know where it comes from and what environmental conditions it needs. So in order to grow coffee successfully, its ecophysiological needs must be taken into account. And coffee is a species that belongs to the semi-deciduous forest over the lower and belongs to the lower story and to systems characterized by abundance. So coffee needs relatively fertile soils. The conduction of full sun monoculture causes the coffee plant to behave as if it were a species from the higher strata. This triggers physiological stress in the plant, leading to premature aging and increased susceptibility to attacks from pests and diseases. So coffee monoculture creates systems of accumulation, that means of degradation, where the proper conditions of fertility, microclimate, and biodiversity necessary for coffee are no longer present. Now some general principles of dynamic agroforest systems, abbreviated DAF, compared with conventional agriculture. So we are seeking for optimizing yields and not maximizing yields of one single crop. Polyculture, positive energy flow, that means a high turnover by decomposition of organic matter. Maintaining water in the system rather than permitting runoff of water after heavy rainfall. Local positive impact on climate. No dependence on external inputs. High productive in the short term and high productivity also in the long term. High biodiversity, lower dependence on market, on advisory services, and of course, lower dependence on external inputs. Then the carbon sequestration rate can be much higher than in conventional farming practices. So in general, we have a positive energy and food balance if it is practiced accordingly. What can be done now? So what we are proposing is establishment of pilot dynamic agroforestry systems for training, exchange, and motivation, upgrading shaded and unshaded coffee plantations to dynamic and resilient agroforestry systems, and the introduction of dynamic agroforestry in national research projects. Do we need a paradigm shift in science? I think yes. Finally, meaningful answers can only be obtained if the correct questions are asked, and this is often not the case. So in Bolivian with 𝗕𝗵𝗺 from Switzerland, the Research Institute of Organic Agriculture, we established a system called Present Wild 15 years ago, and something similar we started a couple of years ago in Ghana. But this is complicated and expensive. But for thorough understanding of sustainable practices, it is advisable to examine the long-term effects of various coffee production systems on soil fertility, biodiversity, carbon sequestration, profitability, and also farmer happiness. This is for me also a very important aspect, not only looking on profitability and whatever, but also how do farmers feel when farming and when living when doing agriculture. Then a very important aspect is also the pruning of shade trees, the management of shade that can increase significantly the yields. We have already some results in respect to cocoa, and coffee and cocoa are quite similar ecophysiologically, also in related to the reaction of management of shade. So with support of the 𝗕𝗃𝗺 project partners in Ghana, a first research trial comparing dynamic agroforestry with officially recommended common practices of cocoa production has been established in the Cocoa Research Institute of Ghana at 𝗏𝗏, New Tafo in 2022. And I want to present it shortly because this could be a nice experience or a nice example what could perhaps also be done in respect to coffee research. So we established a comparison trial of 𝗙𝗵 with best practices recommended by 𝗏𝗏 in 4 repetitions. The plots are around 2,000 to 2,500 square meters big. The data are taken by the 𝗏𝗏 scientific staff, and they also do the evaluation. And 𝗥𝗏𝗹 is responsible for design and management of the 𝗙𝗵 plots. This is a view from the drone. So the plots outlined in red are the dynamic agroforestry plots, and the others are the common practice plot. So this is a planting grid with the densities of the different species. And this is when we started the establishment of the 𝗙𝗵 plots with yam mounds, cassava, and other food crops in the beginning. 2 weeks later, the maize is emerging. Then a couple of months later, around 3 months and a half, the maize is ready for harvesting. You see already the cassava of about 2 meter height. So food production since the beginning is quite important. Then here on the left, the dynamic agroforestry plot. On the right, the common practice recommendation plot managed by 𝗏𝗏. The same, you see on the left, the cocoa tree is protected by cassava. This is in January 2023, mid of the dry season. The dynamic agroforestry didn't receive any kind of irrigation, while the common practice was irrigated at least 2 times a week. No fertilizer application in the dynamic agroforest, and the common practice received the whole package. Once again, the differences in May 2023. And now in September 23, the aspect of the 𝗙𝗵 plot of 15, 16 months after establishing. So what did we achieve in this relatively short time of 15, 16 months? Already in the first year, the cocoa in the 𝗙𝗵 system had superior performance in practically all parameters to the cocoa in common practice related to the vigor, the plant health. We have additional crops, and all this without external input. The Cocoa Board is now considering introducing at least elements of dynamic agroforestry as an official policy for cocoa production in Ghana, and is starting to implement more than 40 pilot plots in the whole country. Now, Cocoa Board is supporting the 𝗕𝗃𝗺 project approach. This was not the case in the beginning because we did everything contrary to the official recommendations. Now they're really open to our experiences, and even 2 of the high-ranking staff attended a workshop in Bolivia. So could something similar be considered also for coffee? I think this could be quite interesting to involve national research stations and governmental institutions in what we are doing or what we are proposing. The trial is now attracting increasingly interest from governmental institution, companies, and international development agencies, because even after a few months, you see already huge differences between both approaches. Now, some remarks regarding the carbon business. Carbon sequestration is increasingly seen as an important measure for mitigating climate change. And compared to traditional cultivation under full sun, agroforestry products such as coffee, also cocoa or oranges in agroforestry, optimize and regenerate the soil to a much greater extent and also increase carbon sequestration. So we are advising projects in Côte d'Ivoire, Ghana, Sierra Leone, and Ecuador, where carbon sequestration can be achieved either through certification, for example, according to the gold standard. This is related to the project in Ecuador, or without certification. So carbon or CO2 can be accounted for under science-based target Scope 3 through a process that is based on recognized standards and is transparently verified by an independent audit. So this is something we are promoting now. It's not necessary to follow a certification that is often complicated and expensive. However, the focus should always be on the implementation of agroforestry and not on the CO2 business. The latter is a promising approach to reducing costs and is also in line with government's REDD+ commitments. Now, some practical aspects of dynamic agroforestry and how do we start establishing a learning plot with coffee. So the same as we did with cocoa in the creek. We discuss or we propose a grid together with the farmers and the technicians. This is the area where this is our coffee production area in Bolivia. So we start with land preparation. In this case, this was an older fallow, of course, without burning, selective weeding, broadcasting maize and beans. Here you see the maize that was broadcasted and covered with the organic matter. After a couple of months, the species emerging and growing up. Here the young cocoa plantation with cassava. We put also ginger and turmeric in between. Here now the young coffee plantation where we respected the natural regeneration. You observe all these naturally regenerated trees that were pruned heavily to dynamize the system and to bring carbon, organic matter on the ground. So this is a picture that shows the density of the shade trees, what we call the mother trees. They were pruned heavily 2 months prior to when we took this photo. And this is quite important to induce the flowering of coffee. So coffee, the flowering of coffee is induced or by drought and rain and by light shade. So in this case, we can induce homogeneous flowering of coffee by managing the shade. And this is crucial and necessary when we speak about agroforestry. And we are promoting now what we call the mother tree concept, where we plant high density of trees to achieve a high turnover of carbon in the whole system. And where instead of coffee, cocoa, imagine coffee. So these trees are pruned heavily once a year. So we maintain them in a manageable height. And by this way, we be able to store for carbon insetting between 8 to 15 tons per year and hectare. So on the left, you see the picture, cocoa field before pruning, and on the right, after being pruned. This is a young plantation where 𝗥𝗲 is still dominating. In Central America, it's staple food. On the right, 𝗕𝗿𝗺 margarita, Mexican sunflower. This is required for biomass production. Then we have here, also young plantation. The first trees are already pruned. This is 𝗥𝗲 and the biomass we achieved by pruning permits to cover to cover the soil. Here an example, it's the same farmer. On the left, common practice cocoa, and the same varieties, the same field with dynamic agroforestry. Another plantation with cocoa and a high density of 𝗥𝗲 trees. And this is now an older cocoa plantation managed with the mother tree concept, where the trees are, the canopy of the trees was totally pruned. Observe the amount of organic matter. There are no weeds that are covering the soil, and we have an incredibly high turnover of organic matter in these plantations. Regarding fruit trees, we have to maintain the architecture of the tree, because in case of fruit trees, these are occupying the middle story, so they have to be above the coffee, and we want to have fruits, so we have to prune them in a different way than the mother trees. And here some first experiences with the Neumann Foundation in Honduras, where we established 2 𝗙𝗏 plots in a young coffee plantation. And we did also some pruning of coffee under shade. So this is the coffee field that have been converted into a 𝗙𝗏. You see this bare soil monoculture, and the same field after a couple of months. Mice had already been harvested, the banana is growing up, and now the 𝗕𝗏𝗵 is starting to dominate the interrows. And of course, the trees, the mother trees, fruit and timber trees, are still protected by the accompanying species. Now, what is very important, the dynamic of shade. So we organized there also training on pruning in height with equipment. So on the left, the field before pruning, on the right, after pruning. Here are some pictures during the pruning of the shade trees. So this should be now assessed. This was done to compare the yields of the part of the plot without pruning and with pruning. This should be done now during the next coffee harvest. So where are we actually, and where should we go? And I like this quotation from Einstein: no problem can be solved from the same level of consciousness that created it. So we have to change our mindset to resolve the problems. I think we are already years after years discussing the same, but where are the solutions we are achieving? Business as usual is not an option anymore. So we must adhere to the principles of life and align with nature. There is no other way for our own survival. The war that humanity has waged against nature is unwinnable. And common practices, or often referred to as best practices, are not economically viable once all incurred costs are accounted for. And dynamic or syntropic agriculture could significantly aid in mitigating the damage we have inflicted and in restoring the landscapes we have destroyed. With 𝗙𝗏, we can make farming interesting for young people again, restore degraded landscapes, mitigate climate change, and generate a decent income, and hopefully achieve happy farmers. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. 𝗂𝗍𝗲, for your presentation. We still have a few minutes for the discussion, and there are indeed a few questions that came in. So just very quickly, I think this one can be answered rather quick. What is the difference between dynamic agroforestry and agroforestry in general?
Well, agroforestry, according the FAO definition, is having a couple of trees or in the borders or in between every kind of crop, while dynamic agroforestry considers the dynamics of species succession in forest systems. So we start with high density of trees, more than 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 trees per hectare, and occupying or combining trees with different life cycle and occupying a different strata. And this is managed accordingly or according to the main crop. So this is in a nutshell the main principles or the main differences between dynamic agroforestry and agroforestry. And perhaps one aspect that should be also underlined is that we are always tending to create static systems. So the solution is not to plant a couple of trees in between a plantation. We have to consider the dynamic, what I mentioned regarding coffee. Coffee needs during a certain period higher input of light, and this has to be naturally. This occurs by the semi-deciduous forest when they are shedding the leaves. And if we cultivate coffee in other ecosystems and using other tree species, then we have to mimic this ecophysiological requirements of coffee.
So dynamic refers to the different strata, the very variety of species, and the dynamic inside the ecosystem, basically.
Yes, and finally, maintaining a high turnover of organic matter within the system. Mm-hmm. And this is only achievable by regular pruning of the accompanying species.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Another very practical question is, what are good sources for the most promising measures of 𝗕𝗏 or regenerative agriculture?
What are the best
sources for the most promising measures? So I assume the question targets in the direction of information sources. Well, but I'm sure it came from the audience.
Yeah, information. Well, this is a relatively, well, it's still not yet a common practice. So in respect of scientific research, you will not find many papers. The agenda 𝗥𝗲𝗵, yeah, there you find a lot of interesting also short videos. Also, the 𝗕𝗏 homepage of 𝗕𝗵𝗵, where this system comparison trial is described, and the scientific published papers are also presented. And also on our own homepage in 𝗥𝗲𝗵, we have some descriptions about specific aspects of dynamic agroforestry. And also on YouTube, you find already a lot of videos.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you very much, 𝗂𝗍𝗲. Yeah, I think the answers were very much the questions were very much answered. We have still a few more, but unfortunately we don't have more time now to answer them. But yeah, thank you very much, 𝗂𝗍𝗲, for your contribution. I hope you also stay a bit longer.
Welcome, with pleasure. So I'm keen to participate also during the next sessions. Thank you.
Yeah, lovely. Thanks. One question that came up also several times was if the presentations are made available afterwards. That is not the case, but we are recording the whole symposium and we will upload it to YouTube afterwards. I think we also shared our YouTube channel. It's the channel of the Initiative for Coffee and Climate. And we will also share the link to the YouTube upload among all registered people. So now we can move right on to the next topic. Yeah, basically a topic which is also a bit similar in the way that this approach also contributes to climate change mitigation alongside adaptation, and that is circular economy, using organic waste to adapt to climate change. And here in this case, we are having two speakers this time, bringing in two perspectives. 𝗕𝗲𝗶𝗺, he's a professor for soil fertility at the Federal University of Lavras in Minas Gerais, Brazil. He's bringing in basically the scientific input and perspective. And his research focuses on the use of biochar in agriculture and improving soil quality. Welcome, 𝗕𝗲𝗶.
Thank you. Thank you for the introduction.
And then we have Sylvia Torres. She's project coordinator at 𝗕𝗲𝗺𝗽𝗀 in Brazil. And Sylvia holds a degree in biological sciences and also in applied ecology. And at 𝗕𝗲𝗺𝗽𝗀, her work focuses on circular economy and waste utilization in the coffee chain. Welcome, Sylvia, and greetings to Brazil.
Thank you very much, Annika. It's just an honor to be here.
Okay, yeah, then I would say I just hand right over and let you do your presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here. We are talking about Sylvia and I, we are talking about the circular economy, using organic waste to adapt to climate change. And our talk is on the perspective of coffee production. So next slide, please. So why using circular economy in the coffee production systems or every production system? Because nowadays we are more used to the linear economy. As you know, we take resource, we make or reproduce, and then we have the waste materials. And now we are going to this more and more into this approach of circular economy. And in the coffee production is not different. So we have the coffee husk or pruning materials, wastewater, several kinds of waste that can be put back in the system, the production system. And that's why we are going to show a little bit here. Next, please. Here you can see these pictures. These are the main waste materials generated in coffee farms in Brazil or other place. For instance, the coffee husk or pruning residues or coffee wastewater. The main one is coffee husk, because every farmer, smallholder, medium farmer, big farmer, they generate obligatorily coffee husk in their production. And next, please. These materials, they are usually not well used. The best that is done is mostly returned to the field as a raw material. But we have some better options that we are going to show here. Next, please. Here, the options that we want to emphasize today is the organic compost. Many people knows about this. It's a kind of a stabilized material. And to produce this compost, a farmer can use the wastewater, for instance, can use coffee husk or manures. We also have the bokashi. It's a kind of a fermented organic fertilizer, mostly used for soil biological activator, as a soil biological activators, and biochar, which I will give a little bit more in the next few slides, just to show, because biochar is now gaining more and more interest worldwide because of its highly stable carbon fraction that can help to sequester carbon in soil and also other properties to improve soil. Next, please. Here, for instance, so what is biochar? Biochar is a type of carbon-rich material aimed to apply in soil, produced from pyrolysis, which means burning without oxygen, the biomass, aiming to enhance soil quality and carbon sequestration. So, for instance, if we apply back to the field like the raw coffee husk, you have 100% of its carbon there, but after a few years, the carbon is gone. With biochar, during the production of biochar, you can generate energy, but you retain only around 50% of the original carbon from the biomass. But after, let's say, 100 years, you still have more than 40% of those 50%. So the degradation rate is really small. That's why we are using biochar as a tool to mitigate climate change and also improve the soil organic carbon in every level. Next, please. Here in this slide, we show the comparison of non-pyrolyzed materials like litter, manure, compost, or whatever biomass that's non-pyrolyzed. The simulation here shows if you apply every year, you have like a peak of carbon in soil, but the degradation rate is very high. So in the long term, you will be able to retain something around 10% of the carbon that was added. On the other hand, biochar in the simulation here, every 3 years, you have some degradation of the biochar, but also an increasing root production. So help to retain some carbon as well. So in the long term, we will have still around 97% of the carbon that was added to the soil. So this is really something really interesting. Next, please. And Brazil is now, we have the production of biochar in the large scale. You can see this picture here. This is the first pyrolysis plant producing biochar in the large scale. But we expect that in the next few years, this will increase. And they started using coffee husk as the feedstock material. So in Brazil, we produce around 50 million bags of coffee per year. Each bag of 60 kilo generates around the same amount of coffee husk. So we generate yearly about 3 million tons. So if we consider 50% of these available for producing biochar, we can have like 94 pyrolysis plant units like this one in the picture here. And the quality of this biochar is really good for soil. It has a pH of 10, which is good for acid soils like the soils that we have in Brazil. The CEC of the material is really high. The water holding capacity is also really high. The carbon content, it's around 70% and has a lot of potassium, 5 to 7% of potassium in the biochar. So this is good for the coffee and work as a fertilizer as well. Next, please. So a couple of examples here of field trials. This one is from Colombia. It's a work that was published in 2022. They didn't use coffee husk, but it's a coffee pulp. It's a kind of coffee husk. They applied at the rate of 8 tons per hectare. That is not a lot, but it's also not a very low application rate, but it's doable. So what they saw here, they compared, they have a control, only biochar, only chemical fertilizer, and also biochar and chemical fertilizers. They applied as a reduced amount, like 66% of the recommended application rate, and also 100%. And as you can see here, if we compare with the chemical fertilizer compared to the biochar plus chemical fertilizers, we had an increase of around 32-33%. And also reducing around 1/3 of the chemical fertilizer, we still get around 15% of yield increase. So this was really, really good result, encouraging result. Next, please. So we also performed some field experiment. This is not published yet. It's still in preparation, the paper. We tested not only biochar, but we compared coffee husk, organic compost, biochar, bokashi, combi, which is a mix of biochar and compost. Also commercial organomineral fertilizers, compost-based organomineral fertilizer, and chemical fertilizers. Next, please. Yeah, we tested this in 2 locations. The first one here in the part is a smallholder farm, and the lower part here it's a big farm. Next, please. So we evaluate for 2 years, the blue and the green. The blue is the first year, the green is the second year. This is only productivity, the yield in bags per hectare. So the first year, biochar was the best treatment, although we can say that this is not reliable data, because we need more years to average this and see the real effects. And next, please. The second year, in the second year, the bokashi was the best treatment in the other location. So let's say the organic amends, they performed equally or better than the conventional fertilizer. So this is some of the results that we have. We also measured some other soil qualities that was affected by these treatments. Next, please. And just to finish my part here, this is just to give a perspective that we are now studying the mixture of biochar with wastewater. Wastewater is a big problem here for farmers. They have a big trouble managing this wastewater. But it's rich, the wastewater is rich in nutrients that could be recycled, but it's a phytotoxic material, so they usually don't apply back to the fields. But here we are testing, if we mix with different proportions of biochar, we could use these as here, or dry this material and apply as a biofertilizer. So this is something that we are interested in, and we are performing some research here in our university. Next, please. So now on, Sylvia will continue the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor. Well, on my part, I'm going to speak a little bit on the approach that we had in the field. So we worked with the farmers on a substitution of chemical fertilizers using these organic composts. So we went, next please, with 3 main products that we worked with farmers. The first one being the organic compost that we wanted to start simple. It was a product that most farmers already knew or had an interest, but didn't really know how to apply or how to use. So we started very basic with coffee husk and manure, either cow, chicken, or other kind of manure that farmers would have more available on their properties or their neighbors. So we will focus a lot on what the residues were from each farmer. So with this organic compost, as Professor Leon showed results, we aim to improve soil structure and fertility, and allowing better absorption of nutrients. And what we almost always say to the farmers is that the application, the benefits of using these products are greater when we use a continuous application over the years. So first year, as Professor Leon showed some results, we can see some differences, but they are still not so reliable. We really need many more years of continuous applications of these products to have a truly great effect, or the ideal and best effect that these products can offer. Next, please. So the other product that we also worked with farmers was the bokashi, which is also used by the base of coffee husk and manure, but different from the organic compost presented before. The bokashi, we add some active microorganisms along with some sugary material to make them activate instantly so that they can start the decomposition of this material. And it helps to promote the biological balance of the soil. It decreases the soil plant pathogen populations. This bokashi is made under no oxygen or very low oxygen situations. So after the mixing of these products, we have to use a material to cover it up so that it doesn't have many interactions with the oxygen. And with that, it kills seedlings or any other plants that could harm the coffee plant. And again, the utilization of these has to be continuous so that the results can be better felt. Next, please. So with these products, we approach the farmers first with a training on circular economy, theoretical discussions with them on the use that they see, the perspective they could see of use of these materials that they have, that they would consider residue, and into promoting the awareness that these products are rich in nutrients and can be used as fertilizers for the farms. And we also did a lot of practical approaches, technical supports with farmers, with groups of farmers, with associations, with leaders in communities, to really engage the farmer not only in the making of the product, but also in understanding how and why these products can improve their yields, decrease their costs, and substitute some of the chemical fertilizers that they have been using. Next, please. And also, finally, we presented the biochar, which most farmers hadn't heard about. And we did a very also introduction with them, showing how to make it, what were the benefits, an analysis. And so it is a great corrective power of soil acidity, and favors the microbiota in the soil because it is a very porous substance. So in this porous, the microbiota can find microhabitats. And so it improves also the microbiota in the soil. It's a permanent storage of carbon, so it can reduce these greenhouse gases. And again, with the continuous application of this biochar, we can see the better results. Next, please. So for the production of biochar, we presented 3 different techniques, depending on what was the residue that the farmers would use as an ingredient for making this biochar. The first one that you can see on the top left of the screen is what we call an oven. So we have a big with a metal, and we put the residue inside. So either coffee husk, coffee pulp. It is ideal for finer residues. And what we do is put a fire on top of it and a lid that would, the fire would start burning, but then only the heat would go downwards. So carbonizing this material, and it's easy to see from the outside how the temperature goes down. And so when it reaches the bottom, we would cool it down with water to stop the burning, because it's very important to stop the burning process while it is still cold and not let it turn into ashes. And so we would use water to cool it down to stop the burning. And it would turn into a biochar that would be ready to be used, either mixed with a compost or directly applied to the soil. A second one that we use that is on the bottom left is what we call the chimney. So we have this chimney-shaped material, also made of metal. And the idea of this is to put the fire inside the chimney and the product that we want to transform to biochar on the outside. And so it would burn on the inside, and the heat only will carbonize the material that is on the outside. This is also very good for finer materials, so coffee husk, coffee pulp, even rice husks, and we have some farmers who have other crops on their lands. It can also be used on those materials. And also using water later to cool down this carbonization in order to let it not turn into ashes. And finally, the other one that we tested was the pit, that is simply making a pit in the soil in a V shape, so that the bottom is straighter than the top. And this one is used only for coffee wood or stronger materials, because finer materials, it's very hard to stop the carbonization before they turn into ashes. So in those ones, we use the coffee wood from prunes to make it into biochar, also applying the coffee wood on top of the other while it was burning. And also when the pit is around 3/4 full, cooling it down with water to let it extinguish the fire, stop the burning, and then use it to turn into biochar. This one, it's better to process it to make it finer, because it's a biochar that is still in big chunks. So we had to use something to make it finer, because the finer it is, the best it is in the soil, because it has more surface of contact. Next, please. And during these years that we've made these experiments and presented these trainings with farmers, we have had some very good farmer stories and feedbacks from farmers who use these products. Next, please. For example, we have one of our farmers, 𝗕𝗲𝗵𝗴𝗄. For him, it was very interesting because he has both cattle and coffee. So he had both of the residues, there's coffee husk and cow manure. So for him, it was very interesting to use those two residues from his farm to make a compost and a product that he could use to decrease his use of chemical fertilizer. Next, please. We also have 𝗕𝗵𝗵, who used biochar. He was very interested in using it first, mixed with his organic compost. He used coal that he found, coal from wood. But this year he says he's going to produce biochar from his own coffee husk to make it into his organic compost, because he found that the results, especially with the humidity of his soil, was very good. Next, please. And like I said, we do not work only on smallholders or only on farmers individually, but also with associations. So we have a big example of 𝗕𝗲𝗵, that is an association of smallholders. They have around 80 farmers who are associates, and they produce a large amount of coffee husk, because a lot of these farmers, they bring their coffees to be done or taken the coffee husk out in the association. And so we did a pilot project with them with some organic compost. And this year, the president is making one big compost to to distribute among the interested associates of 𝗕𝗲𝗵. So also not only individuals, but associations can be a very good hub for making these products. Next, please. That was what we had to share today with you, a little bit of our approach on how we did it on the field, and also some of our research that we did with the university. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you both very much for this enlightening presentation. Yeah, for me, it was particularly lovely because I have just recently been there in Brazil visiting you. So it was, yeah, nice to see also these practices of circular economy again. And yeah, I think that was very interesting, especially like you both said, like Leonidas, your perspective on how biochar can contribute to climate change mitigation also in terms of this carbon calculation. That was very interesting. And Sylvia, also thank you very much for diving so detailed into the process of how to produce a biochar and also the other practices. We have indeed a few questions. Yeah, I don't know who of you might want to answer this one. We know from research that not all biochar is equal, like the same quality. Not only the inputs are important, but also the temperature at which pyrolysis is performed. So how does HRNS ensure or measure the quality of the biochar?
Yes, we have done some research on different types of these products, these residues to make the compost. So pulp, coffee husk, wood, and some other materials, but well, mainly those ones, but we know that also can be done from others. For example, coffee husk, but biochar from coffee husk, we know that it has a very high CHC. Is that in English also, Professor? The cationic CC. So it is very good for cationic exchanges in the soil, for example. As for the temperature, these are very artisanal ways of making biochar. Like Professor Leonidas has mentioned, we have a big company that's interested in making large amounts of biochar, and that has a very controlled quality. But with our farmers, we wanted to introduce them to the biochar and to the idea of this new product. And so we know that the temperature there can be up to 500 centimeters Celsius, and centimeters Celsius, sorry. And so we did a study on all the biochar that we produced, and they were, of course, variabilities among them, but the quality, especially for artisanal use, was still good. I think Professor Leonidas can talk a little bit more on the scientific part.
No, just to complement this, what you said, we don't have the control over the temperature for this artisanal process, as Sylvia showed, but we measured we did a characterization of the samples that we produced for farmers, and the quality was good. The carbon was stable, the nutrients were there, so we could see that it works, you know, even if we don't have a very good control over the process, because it's a very simple approach compared to the industrial level, but it worked. It worked. It produced good biochar quality. We saw this in the characterization.
Okay, thank you. And just one final question, because then we have to move on, unfortunately. But is the amount of biomass waste of a small-scale farmer sufficient to produce biochar for 1 hectare and still resulting in substantial soil enhancement?
So what we have saw. Sorry, Professor.
No, you can go. Go ahead, please.
What we saw is that one farmer with all of his residue, he cannot make biochar or organic compost for all of his area. So it depends on how much of an area he has. If he has 6-7 hectares, he can make it for 1 hectare. But if he only has 1 hectare, he cannot, with his own residues, cover the whole 1 hectare. So that's why the 𝗕𝗲 coming in, or other associations coming in, is so important, because they can bundle up and get residues from all over the area, and then transform it and make it available for those who are really interested in using them.
Mm-hmm. So that's really where the cooperation among farmers and cooperative comes in, right?
Exactly, yeah. Just one farmer is really hard for him to make it all, but together they can
Yeah, I assume that also applies to the other techniques where you need more devices and equipment and you really deal with big quantities of inputs. Okay, I think I have to move on.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Yeah, but thank you so much for this interesting topic. 𝗕𝗲𝗶𝗺, Professor 𝗕𝗲𝗺𝗶𝗁, thanks for taking the time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. It was an honor.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay, we have already reached our final talk for today, which is going to be held by Pablo Ruiz. Pablo is Executive Director at the 𝗕𝗲𝗺𝗀𝗻 in Central America. Welcome, Pablo. Pablo is an agricultural engineer and he has been working with the foundation 𝗕𝗲𝗺𝗻 in Central America since 2009. And he's going to present to us the concept of climate pioneers today. It is about how to involve the next generation to become local climate leaders. And yeah, this approach basically combines developing perspective and life skills of youth with creating climate change awareness and training in climate smart agricultural practices. Pablo, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Annika. And basically, well, thanks to all the participants. I know that the day it has been long, but I want to talk a little bit with you about youth, especially because I think that youth are facing unique challenges in their rural landscapes, and we need to see how we can transform that reality. As you said, basically, I'm based in Guatemala and I'm managing the projects in Guatemala and Honduras. And basically, we had been together with the team of Central America developing this concept of climate pioneers that I would like to share. Can we go to the next slide, please? So basically, I think that we are all aware that youth are facing challenges, as I was saying. I think that as coffee sector, we have been trying to understand better which are these challenges and how we can adjust the systems and the support that we give to youth. But I think that until now, it has not been enough, right? Basically, we need to understand better the realities. We need to understand better what is missing also in the sector, and what are the implications that that the new regulations, that the profitability of the productive systems has for youth, and especially for their perspective to remain in the rural landscapes, right? So basically, this is something that we have created to try to give better perspective to youth. Can we go next, please? So basically, I think that when we see this picture, we can ask ourselves what is missing there, right? And what I think that it's missing is basically something that we are facing in Central America, that it's that in many cases the youth, they don't have a lot of interest to continue growing coffee, but at the same time many other crops, right? Or not in the way that they have been doing or that their parents have been doing in the last decades. They want to transform this reality. And if we as sector don't support them, I think that pictures like this will continue. And basically we will see that seniors, they will remain in the agricultural landscapes, and youth, they will not continue to produce coffee, but also other type of crops. So basically, we have been trying to understand what is missing, and in the next slide, I can show you something that we have found. Basically, in Guatemala and in Honduras in general, we are seeing that basically only less than 10% of the youth, they are basically between the age of 16 years until 30 years old. And basically, this is telling us something, right? And when we try to understand better what is missing, basically, we had tried to conduct some surveys and some studies together with the Honduran Coffee Institute in the case of Honduras. And something that we had found is that, as you can see, basically, in many cases, they are not owning land. They had poor access to finance. Also, there is a lack of technical assistance, or basically they are not receiving enough technical assistance. And many of them, they are not employed, and basically, so they don't have so much business opportunities, right? If we go to the next slide, we can also see that basically we asked this youth what are their aspirations, and basically many of them they were reporting, as I was saying, that in their communities there is a lack of opportunity, that they are not members in many cases of the farmer organizations, cooperatives, associations, whatever. They are not belonging to them, and that basically in the case of Honduras, one of their main aspirations was to migrate. 51% of them, they told us that basically they were thinking to leave their agricultural landscapes and to pursue opportunities in the cities, or in some cases in other countries. The majority of them, they communicated to us that they saw climate change as a risk in their communities, and that they saw that it was affecting their landscapes and the coffee cultivation. And to not be speaking only on bad things, I think that something promising was that 86% of them, they still see that coffee can generate opportunities for the future. But it's not only coffee cultivation. They want to participate in all the coffee value chain. Can we go next? And a similar scenario we found in Guatemala. This is not a study that we conducted as HRNS. It's a study that 𝗂𝗏 conducted, and basically 16% of the youths, they were below 30 years old. As you can see, basically with a low participation also of women in the landscape. Only 6% of them, they were owning lands, and basically only 36% of them, they had their farmer organization supporting them to basically join and to have services inside the farmer organization. And we go next, please. So basically, again, we were asking them, or we analyzed the data generated by 𝗂𝗏, and we also saw that they were not receiving enough technical assistance, that in many cases it was a lot of agronomical topics, that usually they are not involved in leadership positions of the farmer organizations, and that in many cases also they were not part of decision-making in commercialization, and basically other type of activities, right? So as sector, I think that in general, we are not creating this environment for youth to lead their communities and to lead their farmer organizations. And basically, this is something that we need to transfer. Can we go next? So basically, this is how we have created the Climate Pioneer approach, because basically we understood that climate change will continue to affect coffee cultivation, as we had seen in many landscapes in Central America. We also have tested successfully with the Coffee and Climate Initiative some promising climate smart agricultural practices. And basically, we believe that it was the time or the perfect timing to create knowledge for youth. And basically, we try to combine a methodological approach focused on creating life skills for youth, and at the same time to provide them climate smart knowledge to basically to make them change agents to lead the change in their communities. We first tested this together with 𝗕𝗲𝗶𝗺𝗁 in 𝗥𝗲𝗵𝗂𝗂 in Western Honduras. And then since 2022, we have been expanding this also in partnership with Tim Hortons and with Catholic Relief Services in Guatemala. So basically, I'm going to share a little bit about the climate pioneer concept. Next, please. First, by understanding that climate change is for us a reality in Central America. We have many microclimatic conditions who influence basically how we produce coffee, and that we believe that there is no one size fits all to create these solutions. And this is where we believe that youth can help us to identify these potential solutions and to test more practices. Can we go next? Because at the end of the day, basically, when we are still discussing about climate change, well, in the reality, in the rural landscapes, is that basically we are facing climate change, but also we are facing many other challenges as poverty, and that basically farmers, they are becoming old, and the new generations, they don't want to lead these farms, right? Next, please. So, who are the climate pioneers? Basically, we had identified climate pioneers as youth who are between ages of 16 until 30 years old. And usually they belong to coffee families, but we had also had participants who are not basically belonging to a coffee producing families. And this is the faces of farmers that you can see that have joined the program. We believe that they have joined the program and who they are demonstrating already a lot of passion and commitment to change their communities. Can we go next? So basically, our vision is that they can develop self-confidence and skills to take leadership in their communities, that they can help us to sensitize more farmers on climate change awareness, and also on which are potential solutions that we can do. We had also included a module to train them on extension skills to help them to transfer the knowledge, because in many cases this is missing also, and to help them to identify business opportunities on promising climate smart agricultural practices, right? This is basically complemented with training on business administration and in other type of services to help them to become entrepreneurs. Can we go next? So this is our climate pioneer sketch, where you can see that basically we are training them on life skills, where we are giving training on leadership, vocational training, and critical and innovative thinking. We are also including a training module on climate change, where we are providing awareness of what is climate change, how to take climate action, what is the role of technology into climate change, and also helping them to implement some demo plots at farm level. We had also trained them on extension and advisory services, and we believe that basically together with them, there is a need to create better conditions in their farmer organizations. So basically we are connecting them to farmer organizations who are in the rural communities, but also together with the farmer organizations, we are creating services in order to improve the way that they approach to climate change and to the challenges that they had in their landscapes. So finally, for us, climate pioneers are generating two main impacts. One, they are becoming entrepreneurs who are establishing new businesses to address climate change, and also they are becoming change agents to promote climate actions. And this is where basically we believe that together with creating skills on youth and in the farmer organizations, we are going to empower youth and create competitive farmer organizations for the future. Can we go next? So basically, until now, we have been helping them to equip them with better tools and technologies to understand the risks that they had in their communities. We have been using the CNC approach to introduce CNC practices and to establish together with them demo plots to see what is working and what is not working as practice in their landscapes. And basically, we have been partnering with other organizations to build local structures that create better services for them and support them to thrive in their communities. Next, please. Until now, we had a training curricula that we applied together with them, as you saw, basically addressing life skills, addressing climate change and extensionism. Many of them, they had participated, graduated already with more than 30 hours of training in the different modules. And basically, we had 110 youth who had graduated already, and we had 200 participants who are being trained until now. Next, please. The impact that we have generated to the date is that we had a high participation in the case of Honduras of women joining the program. Many of them had the capacity to implement climate smart solutions in demo plots of their families or in demo plots of themselves. We had also trained them and create skills on 30%, 33% of them to basically to become also entrepreneurs. And also this helps to generate a better perspective because they are generating not only income from coffee cultivation, but also from other types of businesses. As I was saying, together with the farmer organizations, we had set up revolving funds. So basically, we are addressing one of the issues that we had found with them, that they don't have access to finance. And basically, by generating this training together with youth, also we had showed the communities that there are new leaders there. And basically, many of them, they are leading committees or they have been more involved in their farmer organizations. In the case of Honduras, until now, only 7% of them had joined communities, farmer organizations, or other NGOs to work as extension agents. So basically, they had already working in transferring knowledge. And we go next, please. In the case of Guatemala, again, climate pioneers, they are starting to take decision-making position in their communities. They are starting to implement climate-smart agricultural practices in demo plots. And they had started to diversify their income and establishing their own businesses. Can we go next, please? So those are some pictures of climate pioneers. As you can see, basically, they are understanding or learning first which are promising climate smart practices that they can apply, but also then they are applying this knowledge in their communities. Can we go next? And I would like to give you an example. This example is 𝗕𝗲𝗶𝗁. He is a young coffee farmer from Western Honduras. He belonged to a farmer organization called 𝗕𝗵𝗵. 𝗕𝗵𝗵 basically was offering together with us to have a cohort of farmers to participate in the climate pioneer approach. And something that he was telling us is that he didn't hesitate to join this type of trainings, and that for him it helped him to improve his skills. And for him, that was something good to apply also in the management that he's doing for his coffee crops, but also for the management tools that he was able to acquire. Like, for example, he started to use some technologies like 𝗕𝗲 that you were seeing some of the practices that the tool that helps to understand climate suitability by 𝗕𝗲𝗵 in a previous conference. Also 𝗥𝗲 that help us to understand climate meteorological information. Can we go next, please? And basically, Michael, together with the skills that he earned in the program, he was able to become a leader in the municipality where he belongs. And basically, he was able to start an own business to sell coffee trees, but also shade trees. And this helped him to generate a business opportunity that was creating income for more than $2,000. Can we go next? So basically, until now, we had seen that for us, it's key that we as sector, we create a better framework for the climate pioneers, that basically there are opportunities that we can generate for them to be leaders in their communities, but we need to create incentives for them in order to be there. We are trying to find partnership to complement the program that we had until now. And also these youth, they have become, they had started their business. We want to help them to consolidate this type of businesses because they are just beginning. And basically, we believe that there are new training topics that we can incorporate for the future, like, for example, how to address the new European regulation, but also how to address the different realities that are changing in the agricultural landscapes, right? Can we go next? And finally, well, this is something that we would like to, I would like to finish, right? That basically youth, they want to remain, or they can remain in their agricultural landscapes if we create the conditions for them, that they have helped us to test new practices because they want to innovate, they want to test new things. And basically, together with that, we can make all the families to prosper, right? Because as you can see in this picture, you can see families integrated, you can see different type of farmers. So we believe that rural youth can help us to transform these realities. So thank you a lot for your time. And if you have any questions, please let me know.
Thank you very much, Pablo Ruiz. Yeah, there's indeed already a question from the audience. I'm not sure if it was already answered now in the course of your presentation, because yeah, basically you presented the Climate Pioneers as a program of learning and also bringing the young people into entrepreneurship, getting also business ideas. But the question is, are the Climate Pioneers paid by the project, or could they be paid in the future by farmers?
Yeah, the idea is once, if they are going to become extension agents in their communities, the idea is that the farmer organizations start to remunerate the climate pioneers for the knowledge that they are going to transfer. So basically, they become like the extension agents in the community, right? And basically, the examples that we had until now is that yes, they have been remunerated. They are not paid for participating in the training. They are paid once they graduate and they start to provide the service of being an extension agent, right?
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And another, I think, very interesting question just came in. Did young people give up the idea of migrating due to Climate Pioneers?
Yes, basically, I think that we haven't asked them directly until now if they have give up their idea of migrating, but something that they had communicated in some interviews together with them is that now they see themselves in their communities with a project of life. Even if it can be to become an entrepreneur, or even if it can be to become an extension agent, they had a plan of life in their community. So basically that gives them a cause to continue in that region, right? Because they had better opportunities. They know that they had a farmer organization who is supporting them. They had a network of partners who is supporting them. So basically we believe that it will contribute to reduce that expectation that about migration, right?
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. One other question is, how do senior farmers receive the climate pioneers? Is there a knowledge transfer also between the generations?
Yeah, I think that this is something interesting, Annika, because you can see that usually this is a challenge also when we are talking about coffee farmers, right? We usually tend to know that we know everything, but with climate change, basically we are facing a lot of uncertainty of the next steps that we can do on management of the farms. So basically, we had seen that youth here play a relevant role because they want to innovate, they want to change the way that they have been farming in the past. So basically, what we had seen is as they are incorporating innovative practices in the farm, they are generating new knowledge and they had good topics to discuss with elders, right? And basically, they had the opportunity to discuss better, to learn new techniques. So basically, at the beginning, it has been a resistance, but then as it has been a learning process and they are learning in the field, basically they have been accepting very well the role that the youth are playing with climate pioneers, right?
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah, that's very interesting. Pablo, thank you so much for presenting the climate pioneers, for sharing your experience with this great approach. And yeah, so I would say we are closing now the symposium also. Thank you, Pablo.
Thank you very much, Annika.
Yeah, well, and that was our first day of our symposium. A big thanks again to our speakers. Thank you for sharing your research results, for sharing your practical experience from the field, from your projects, and also sharing your personal stories and your knowledge. And also big thanks to the audience. Thanks for the strong engagement. I really enjoyed that we had so many questions from the audience, and I know we could not answer all of them, but we did our best. So I hope you're going to join us again tomorrow. Tomorrow we are starting 1 hour later than today at 3 p.m. Central European time. So you can see in our agenda on the event page by clicking on convert to your time zone, as you probably already did today, when the different talks are starting in your time zone. And tomorrow everything's going to be about barriers and pitfalls in the implementation of projects. So as I said, we don't only want to look on the bright side, on the success stories, but also shed a bit light on potential points where you need to be a bit cautious maybe in the implementation. And tomorrow we are going to have speakers who talk about their first-hand experiences in that. Very important note for tomorrow, please use the other link, not the one that you used today. We are sharing this link also here in the chat. You will also receive the link still today per email when you have registered through Eventbrite. And so what leaves me to say is have a good rest of your day or evening, wherever you're joining, and see you back tomorrow. Bye.